Members of council, ladies and gentlemen, the clerk advises me that it is now 7 o'clock, so I will call this council meeting to order. And I would ask you to please stand and join with me in a moment of silent reflection on our national anthem, O Canada. Madam Clerk, any agenda announcements and/or amendments?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would like to note a typographical error on the printed agenda. Under Section 8, confidential section, the agenda references OPA 3 instead of OPA 31. This has since been corrected on the website version of the agenda.
And I thank you for that. So, members of council, if you'd so note. Any disclosure by any member of council this evening? No disclosures? Okay, we will deal with the consent items. Have a resolution moved by Councillor Best and second by Councillor Cluett, and be it resolved that consent items numbers 1 to 8 be approved. Are there any one of those that any member of council wish pulled out and dealt with separately? Councillor Chandler.
Thanks, Your Worship. Item 3.
3. Any, Councillor Hamid?
Item number 8, please.
Any other that any member of council wish pulled out and dealt with separately? And again, members of council, I'm going to suggest that I want to pull out number 6 very briefly as well, so we'll deal with them in that order. Councillor Chandler, number 3.
Thanks, Your Worship. On page 11 of the document of the report, there's a couple areas under recreation programs and facilities and parks. And the first thing deals with the Child Care and Early Years Act of 14 and the idea of reinstating an after-school kindergarten program. And I guess my question is around is this not being provided by the private sector in the town of Milton today? And the second thing is, how does this square with the core services review? And I would suggest the same thing under facilities and parks, Your Worship, around the core services review and the costs associated that have been identified, and how this squares with that.
Ms. Scott, I know there's a comment or two in there, but a question or two as well, so maybe if you'd be so kind to respond.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, regarding the relationship to the core service delivery review, that will be coming before Council on August the 26th. The costing for the services will be included as part of, there's 18 services provided in recreation, and I think it was 50 sub-services, so those costings will be provided. So the user fee report would not contradict what's going to come forward in the service delivery review. In terms of the recreation programs and the changes to the Act, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, something was introduced where we couldn't provide programming for certain ages of a certain duration without being part of like a Daycare Nurseries Act. So based on need in the community, it was suggested that we reintroduce the program.
The question of the private sector versus the public sector there, I might have missed that in your overview.
Through your worship, what I just mentioned essentially was there are after-school opportunities provided by a number of providers, but due to the number of little people in Milton, it was suggested that by staff that there is a demand and need to provide this type of service, and now we're able to do so as a municipality once again.
Thank you. Councillor Chandler?
Yeah, Your Worship, I understand the response. I guess how new is the information that was used to make that judgment? Because this is changing on a fairly frequent basis, and so information that may be 18 months old is old. And there are new operators coming into the community on a fairly regular basis, and all I'm suggesting is that let's make sure that our foundation of information to create this service is in fact up to date. Thank you.
Okay, is there anything further on number 3 by any member of council? Okay, and again, in order, I'd ask that number 6 be pulled out. And again, if members of council, I know every one of you can read as well as what I can. And this deals with Bill 108. And of course, I know that it's already legislated, but some of the regulations are still to be put into place. And of course, you will see in the recommendation there that staff be authorized to prepare additional submissions. So I guess the question is, with what we know or don't know, I just wonder what additional changes we may or may not be able to make with Bill 108. And at least in my opinion, Bill 108 is so encompassing. At least in my opinion, there's some good things in there, and there's some things not so good in there as it affects the property tax base any place in Ontario, including Milton and Halton here. So I'm not sure, Mr. Acting CEO or Madam Clerk or any staff person that's going to be charged with bringing this additional information forward. What can we maybe see? What can we expect? And I know Councillor Chandler had already made mention of the provincial review that's going on that affects Halton there, and keeping in mind that what may or may not happen. So the big picture, I guess, we don't know, but I just wonder on where staff is coming from on this. So, Mr. Cowan?
Through the Mayor. So some of the large variables that we still don't have some of the answers to that will be resolved through this process include things like determining what the cap would be on the community benefits charge, which will affect our ability to fund parks and recreation facilities. In terms of defining that cap, also how it's split between the upper and lower tier. There's nothing really in the regulation or legislation yet that speak to things like that. So there is an ability, hopefully through this, to help inform that discussion. Other things that have been decided, there's still ability in terms of some of the procedural impacts and how we roll them out. So for example, in the legislation or regulations, it's now given us some prescription in terms of the cash flow that certain types of development will have to collect over a period of 5 to 20 years. Some opportunity maybe procedurally for our own deferral agreements, we would try to get some form of security to ensure that the municipality was protected should anything happen in that 5 to 20 year period. So perhaps there's an opportunity to help influence the discussion in that regard. So we are going to be commenting on things like that, and there's still information we're expecting throughout the fall essentially where we'll have to provide some more feedback as well.
I thank you for that, and I think council should be aware of the positives and/or the negatives that we will be faced with. Ms. Koopmans, I know that you had your hand up there. You might be able to contribute to better understanding where we may be heading.
Through you, Your Worship, just in terms of reviewing the regulations, there's a lot of detail coming through the regulations, and some of it will require not only analysis, but perhaps some background studies to understand what the full work program will be required in order to fully implement and take advantage of even some of the positive things in the Act. So we are continuing to monitor and work with our other municipal counterparts across the region and to gain a better understanding.
I thank you, and I thank staff very much for that. I think it's important that not only we as elected people understand where we might be headed, but I think it's also just as important that the public understand what might be happening to the property tax base in all the communities across the province. Councillor Best?
Yes, just on that item, you beat me to it, Your Worship, regarding the AMO, Association of Municipalities of Ontario. We have an executive meeting on Thursday. We're getting an update on Bill 018, where we've put a staff technical group together with the province and basically highlighting some of the concerns that you've raised. And it's something at the conference in August, you'll be hearing a lot more from the staff as well as provincial counterparts, including our new parliamentary assistant who might be able to help us out as well.
I thank you. So I guess bottom line is stay tuned to Bill 108 because it could have some very positive and/or very negative impacts on us. So stay tuned. Anything further on 6? Again, no change on that. Councillor Hamid, number 8.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question and a suggestion, I guess. I just want to thank staff for the work on this intersection. I know Councillor Ali and I have heard from a lot of residents asking for the stop sign there. If it's approved tonight, through you, Your Worship, when do we expect to see the stop sign up?
Scripps.
Through you, Your Worship, probably take 3 or 4 weeks after we get utility locates in there. So.
Okay, and just one ask I had, I can follow up privately. In a growing area such as this one, there were 3 counts done, there were 2 collisions in the area, and we could see the counts going up. The counts didn't meet the standard until now, but just 9 months prior, we could see a substantial increase. So in cases like this, perhaps you can use some judgment to see that a count will be met 6 months down the road, so we don't have to wait an additional 6 months. Thank you.
Aye, thank you very much. Is there any further on 8? If not, you heard the resolution that I read before. There's no changes on either 3, 6, or 8. If not, those in favor of the motion. That's carried. Okay, members of council, I'm going to be turning the chair over to Councillor Malboof. We are going to be going into to committee, and I know that his portion of the meeting will not likely be as quick as the official part of the council meeting, and he's got a fairly hefty agenda, I know that. So, Madam Clerk, have we forgotten anything in this portion of the meeting?
No, Your Worship.
I thank you. So this portion of the council meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. If you'd give us about 2 minutes to turn things around, we'll get further underway. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll now call this portion of the meeting to order. We have no public meetings. We're going to be starting with presentations and delegations. So before we start, to all of the, we have a large number of delegates tonight who wish to speak, and so out of fairness to everybody, we will be adhering strictly to the 10-minute rule. Some councillors did ask me to make it 2 minutes, but so we go to the 10-minute limit, okay? And then also I would ask to the delegates, if you've heard your point or argument made prior, I would ask that maybe you skip it when you come. I know we're politicians, but we only have to hear things once or twice, and then we get it. So I would ask that. And to members of council, I would ask you to refrain from getting into any one-on-one debates. You can ask questions of the delegates for clarification, but we don't want to get into debates and drag this on all night. So with that, we'll start with the first motion. Yeah, okay, delegates first. Yeah. Okay, so then we have one registered delegate on the item on the autism spectrum disorder funding and services. Melanie Fox, if you come forward, please.
Awesome. Hi, guys. How are you? Good. All right.
Please state your name and address for the records.
My name is Melanie. I live in 147 Main Street South. That's it? Okay. So good evening, guys. Here we are once again fighting for services that should be mandatory for all autistic children, youth, and adults. It is unbelievable to me that in today's world, we still have to fight and plead for people in power, for people with autism. Let me give you a little recap of who I am. My name is Melanie, and I have a son with autism. Some of you have seen my face before. I've been on the Ontario Autism Coalition, protesting and advocating for children, youth, and adults with autism, and then also volunteering for Project Autism. It was 2015-16. I was standing in front of you guys to pass the motion for no age cap for children to access ABA program. And now I would like to, sorry, I'm a little nervous. With the new stuff that's happening for the OEP, like what Doug Ford has added, more children in larger classes, and putting in the childhood budget for funding to get ABA program. My son and many other people's children are drastically affected by these changes to the OAP. It is simply not nearly enough. I cannot idly stand by as a parent with a child with special needs knowing that the program has been altered and it negatively impact these children's lives. The wait time for ABA program is unbearable and completely unacceptable. These services are not available in time when they absolutely need be. I have already seen the impact for when they cut the teachers. My son's in summer school, and his teacher's actually teaching 2 credits instead of 1, so he's not really getting what he needs for his education. My fear is that children without needs neurotypical will be given preferential treatment by staff due to lack of supports. Overburdened staff teaching multiple courses will be already being under enough pressure to help students in the time in a regular day. How are children with needs going to have a chance? The ABA program is the solution and still the solution for these issues. The ABA program was put in place, and as of many therapy programs for children, to give them that chance. In closing, my hope for my son and future, all children's future, change the OAP to needs-based therapy and have no childhood budget. Thank you for your time.
Any questions for the delegate from Councillor Cluett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Melanie, for attending here again. I know it was a few years back where you spoke, amongst others, about the changes to the autism program back then.
Yes.
And here we are again.
Here we are again.
And I do want, like I said, do want to thank you for your presentation. I'm going to be bringing it up slightly a little bit later on, but there was a meeting today with the Minister of Children and Community Services, Todd Smith, and it was the beginning of the listening tour. Can you give us a little bit of, and the residents, a little bit of a feedback of what was discussed today? Are we stepping in the right direction?
They are going to be stepping in the right direction. It's just taking the small steps. He is new, so he's been asking all the same questions like all the other politicians have. So we'll see what happens with what he gets with the feedback of all the parents, because a lot of the parents are still waiting for ABA services. For schools, there's one child that's in kindergarten. They only had 2 teachers, which should be maybe 3 or 4, and one child actually ran out of the classroom, and these 2 teachers are great teachers, but now they need some more supports.
So basically what we're saying here is it is not just the community and children's services, there's also the Ministry of Education that has to be involved in this as well to help aid the teachers in our classroom sizes for this. But I just wanted to say thank you very much for your presentation. Look forward to your continued work with Project Autism as well in our community, because that seems to be growing quite a large bit here in the town of Milton. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? No. Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, we'll be voting on the motion. Does the mover want me to read the whole motion, or you want me to read the whole motion out?
Are you able to read the whole motion out?
Might have to take a breath, but okay. We have a motion moved by Councillor Cluett, seconded by Councillor Ali. Be it resolved, whereas according to the National ASD Surveillance System, autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is one of the most common development disabilities in Canada. 1 in 66 children is diagnosed with ASD. And whereas according to the Canadian Medical Association Journal, approximately 1% of the Canadian population is affected by ASD, which means there are approximately 100,000 Ontarians on the autism spectrum. And whereas changes over time in its expressions, challenges, and delights, Ontario must be prepared to support children, youth, and adults within the context of development, learning, family, and community. Supportive, understanding, and inclusive communities ensure that each person with ASD is provided the means to achieve quality of life as a respected member of society. And whereas Ontarians must support the individual needs of a person with ASD throughout their lifespan using evidence-based treatment and intervention, while remembering that development trajectories are constantly changing. And whereas the supports and services for adults on the spectrum are inadequate and fragmented, and fail to address the needs across the entire lifespans. And whereas school boards are expecting an influx of about 1,000 students with autism as families lose funding, and leaving educators poorly equipped with the resources required to provide specialized care and a higher level of assistance for children with special needs. And whereas funding will not address the critical needs for assistance for families not only in their younger years, but after the age of 18. And whereas the changes which will come into effect April 1 will mean that thousands of families currently receiving services could see drastic cutbacks. And whereas, given the impact of the recent announcement of the loss of funding at Erin Oaks has resulted in job losses that will directly impact services to families in Milton and Halton region. Therefore, be it resolved that the town of Milton formally requests the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services suspend implementation of its proposed plan and continue to identify and advocate for a sustainable funding plan for families with individuals with ASD to ensure adequate resources for applied behavioral analysis and needed therapies. And that the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services work collaboratively with families, community partners, and stakeholders to develop a funding plan which will guarantee every person with ASD has access to funding, specialized programming, and service providers. And that children currently enrolled in autism programming continue to receive services, and that the Clinical Expert Committee be reassembled to provide advice and feedback, and that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to Premier Ford, Mr. Fideli, local members of Provincial Parliament, Region of Halton Council, chairs of the respective school boards in Halton Region, and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, Town of Oakville, Town of Halton Hills, City of Burlington, leaders of the Opposition Party, the Green Party, Project Autism, and Autism Ontario. Any questions to the motion?
Just a few comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for that. And thank you to Council and to our delegation who, there was another delegate that was registered. She wasn't able to make it. Just a little bit of a brief history. On February 6th, the province announced changes to its autism program, which would see funding given directly to families instead of to regional service providers. It's an effort to clear a massive wait list of children waiting for autism in the province. The changes mean families would receive $20,000 a year until their child turned 6. After that, families would get $5,000 a year until their child turns 18. But intensive therapy can cost up to $80,000 a year, and it's vital for the provincial government to work with families and service providers to come up with the best solutions possible. Ever since the provincial government was elected last year, there have been a number of changes announced to the funding program, sadly with little or no consultation with parents. Legislate and then negotiate isn't a sustainable model. The resulting changes have made to the funding model, however, have led to many providers having to lay off staff, as was the example recently from Erin Oaks Kids Centre here in Halton and Peel Region. This directly affects the services available to parents and children right here in Halton. There are many different levels of autism. Some children require little support, while other kids have severe deficits in verbal and non-communication skills and need a great deal of support. This motion is just one of many that have been passed already or will be passed by municipalities in Ontario, including Halton Hills and Oakville right here in Halton Region, that have called upon the provincial government to have a dialogue with families affected by the program. And as I mentioned earlier on, there was some good news today, because just today, Todd Smith, MPP, who is the Children and Community and Social Services Minister, held first of what I hope to be many in his listening tour events when he met with parents with autism and advocates to discuss these issues. And I personally want to continue this advocacy by passing this motion on behalf of the many parents that have contacted us throughout Halton Region and here in the town of Milton. Thanks very much, and I hope that everybody would support this motion.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I just wanted to thank Councillor Cluett for all the hard work that he has done to bring this forward and with the autism community. I just will keep it very brief and short. I just want us to realize that this is our new normal. It's a very neurodiverse normal, and the struggles the families have to go through is something that we cannot even imagine. So at this point, I just want to request the Council to support this motion. Thank you.
Any further comments before we vote? Okay. Then I'll call the vote. All those in favor of the motion? Passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to the next motion, which is dealing with the climate emergency. Like I said, we have a number of delegates, so I'll go through here by order. First is Haya Sharori. Hope I got that pretty close. Okay, thank you.
Hello, Council. Hope you're doing good today. My name is Haya Shahruri, and I stand here to convince you to pass the climate emergency motion. I am a student in grade 10 in Bishop Redding Catholic Secondary School, and towards the end of my 9th school year, my class and I started learning about climate emergency and its effects on our future, and it's pretty much what drove me to stand here today. That day, it was very, important to me because it made me stand here today. I'm here today to show you I care. I care about my future, my children's future, my generation's future, Canadians' future, everyone's future. If I had known about this topic sooner, I would have been here before and sooner. I didn't know that our planet had until 2030 to reduce its emissions. I didn't know that most of our species would be at verge of extinction. And I definitely didn't know that my generation would be at risk because of the action not taken up till this point. And I believe it to be a very big issue. If I had known sooner, I would have been here before. The citizens of this country want a change, and more specifically, the Halton region wants a change. About 1 week ago, I had a survey sent out to the public. It was a small 2-minute survey, and people shared their opinions on climate change and what they think some actions should be taken towards ending climate change. And these were some of the comments. I'm not sure. So as you could see, many people do want to change, and they're giving their opinions on what they can do to change, like growing trees or educating children or reducing plastic use or spreading the word or even just not cutting trees because that increases our carbon emissions. This small 2-minute survey that people cared so much about shows you that people do want to change, that they took time out of their busy lives to share their thoughts on what they can do to end it. And I believe this to be one of the points that can really drive this motion to pass. This small percent of people that are not aware about climate change are the people that we need to educate and take action to make them aware. And because this small percent can make the biggest difference in society today, we need to educate people on things that can be done around the town in their day-to-day lives to help change this condition. The UN tells us in a recent article, that it is abundantly clear that a much deeper, faster, and ambitious response is needed to unleash the social and economic transformation that is needed to achieve our 2030 goal. On that same article, it says that the natural environment is deteriorating at an alarming rate, the sea levels are rising, ocean acidification is accelerating, the last 4 years have been the warmest on record, 1 million plants and animal species are at risk of extinction, and land degradation continues unchecked. Our world is in danger and we need to make a change. Scientists around the world are saying that it will impact our health in a negative way. The UN is telling us that it will threaten the sustainable environment, and this is an emergency that we really do need to pass. Over 19 other countries have passed this motion, including Australia, Britain, Germany, and the United States, 45 other town councils in Canada as well. 750 other governments in total have passed this declaration. So you might be asking how? How will this motion help the community? Well, I could tell you, as a youth citizen in Milton, passing it will help because everyone around me wants a clean future. I, as a 15-year-old, am concerned because the changes that will happen will impact my generation and my kids' generation as well. For one, passing this motion will increase awareness around town and certainly across the country. It'll tell people that the way we are living is serious and it is going to have big effects in the future. One of the ways it will aid people is it will increase awareness and will make people rethink the way they are using their electricity. We can help encourage them to change to renewable energy such as solar, wind, or water. Milton has a big opportunity to make change now because we are a growing town. We have the opportunity to change. If we implement it now, it will be easier and simpler for the town to adjust rather than when we have a population like Mississauga with over 800,000 residents. So how can we increase awareness? Well, I could tell you from my survey I put out, about 30% of the people didn't know what climate change is whatsoever. So we can start there. First, we can, for example, put a tab on our Milton homepage designated just for climate change and the plans that we have towards the future. As you can see here, this is the Oakville homepage, and they have a full tab just designated to climate change and how they declared and their plans towards the future. As for Milton, we don't have anything talking about climate change. So that would be a good step, because a lot of our citizens go on that website to check our events and things that are happening in the town. So it would be a good opportunity to include that tab and that information. And secondly, we can have multiple events around town where we can educate others on climate change. What we are doing to change and what we are doing to change it. So if we have an event and we have some rides, we can use, for example, the wind turbine as our electricity to show the people that we do care. And lastly, we can inform the public about climate change by putting stickers like the advertisements on public transportation about climate change. Very simple things such as, are you like closing your lights? Are you growing a tree? Simple things like that can keep them aware and tell them that, like, it'll keep it in mind that, like, they're at their house and they're leaving a room. It reminds them to maybe close the lights or recycle a product instead of putting it in the garbage. These things can make a difference, and it will if we do show people that. Because citizens do spend about 50% of their time traveling from one place to another, so it would be the perfect timing to make that change and for them to be aware. Today in Milton, we have minor laws that are placed to protect the environment. 70% of our natural environment is green. Is green. And because of the actions that were not taken by other towns, that number will very soon decrease, and we won't have as much land. These are some images of around the world of the effects that happened, including flooding, droughts, and the environment dying. So as you can see, our ice caps are melting. We're having heavier rainstorms, like the very severe thunderstorm that we had on Saturday. That would be an effect of climate change. We have factories that are polluting our air, and we have our soil drying out very quickly. As you can see, like, lakes are drying. Their flooding areas, our green spaces dying, we have more flooding. And we have green space as well, more dying, and lakes drying up. Ice caps are melting even more at a faster rate. And we have forests that are being cut down. So as you can see, in just 2 to 5 years, in each of those photos, it was just about a few years difference. And you could see there have been very big, drastic changes. Imagine in 11 years, from now to 2030, it'll be twice the results you're seeing right now if we don't protect the environment. And change needs to happen now, not tomorrow or next week. I, as a youth, see the world differently now because of me educating myself about climate change. I see the world differently because every time I'm going out with friends or family, I'm looking out the window and seeing all the things that are affecting our society today, like the garbage on the floor, the air pollution that's happening, like factories out of cars and buses. We have emissions, and we have plastics that are being used in public spaces, which we need to change. It scares me because I don't want my future to be in jeopardy, and I care. So thank you for listening.
You just made your 10 minutes.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of the delegates from members of council? Councilor Dirksen.
Just a quick question. Thanks so much, Haya, for your presentation. I'm really impressed with your initiative to do that survey. That's really cool. It's been a long time since I was 15. Can you just make a real quick comment about what maybe your friends and your peer group think about this issue as well? Like, obviously, you're very passionate about it, but what about everybody else?
Well, my friends all support me in this. They all think that it is a major issue and it needs to change. We need to do some kind of law or some kind of thing to make them aware about the problem. They all support me with it, and they all think it is a major issue. Even all my teachers as well encouraged me to come stand here today, and there was actually a presentation one day at our school of a man who came and talked to us about climate change, and he was also another part that really drove me to stand here today. So I do think it's a major issue, and so do my friends and my peers around me.
No further questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next speaker we have is Mr. Darrell DeMille. Mr. Darrell DeMille.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Your Worship, fellow councilors, thank you very much for having me here this evening. My name is Darrell DeMille. I live at 8424 Guelph Line, and I've operated as an insurance agent for homes and businesses in Milton for over 32 years. The opinions I express this evening are not necessarily represent Desjardins General Insurance Group or the Insurance Bureau of Canada, but this evening I really didn't prepare to bring my opinions. I prepared to bring their opinions. And my role is to present the facts and opinions of the Insurance Bureau of Canada and the studies they've presented on climate change and how it affects the insurance industry. You will see on the following slides a lot of that data, but kind of at a humorous standpoint, since 1922, our previous company was known as State Farm Fire and Casualty, one of the largest insurer of homes in the world. And in recent years, due to the changes in environment, they actually were jokingly considering changing the name of the company to State Farm Water and Casualty. Now to those studies, if I may. Thank you, Brett. IBC plays a leadership role in conducting research and claims from severe weather. Here are some of the studies that have been prepared, and Council, you do not need to make notes on this. I've provided a handout to you listing all the studies. Also, in this document, those links are live, so once this evening is over, Brett, you can actually go to the links and get further information should you do it. The second slide, again, is just further studies conducted by the Insurance Bureau of Canada. This next individual is Professor McBean of the University of Western Ontario, and he has his comments on climate change and a study for IBC.
Our members, the 200 property and casualty insurers in Canada, have been seeing an increase in water damage and property claims related to severe weather over the past 2 or 3 decades. So we're interested in seeing how we can adapt to that, how we can reduce costs, and we're also interested in seeing what we might expect in the next 10 to 20 years. It's directly affecting our industry now.
It will be much warmer winters, 3 to 5 degrees Celsius warming in the winter time. We'll have warmer summers, although the warmer summers will be not quite as in number of degrees as much as warming as averaged in the winter time. We will have reduced snow so that as precipitation, so we'll have less snow on the ground in the spring. So if you're a spring skier, you might want to rethink your strategy. But then looking at the events we're really focusing on is more heavy rain events, more or less coast to coast to coast. These rain events will occur with greater frequency, intensities will go up somewhat, and more hot days. This leads to other factors, let's say combining with, for example, sea level rise on our east and west and north coasts. When you have a storm that is let's say more intense with the higher sea level, what we call the storm surge, the wind pushing the water up in big waves onto the coast, will mean areas such as downtown Halifax Harbor under huge threat, places like Vancouver International Airport. These will have impacts, and we need responses to these, both in infrastructure, early warning systems, public education programs.
Catastrophic losses in the insurance industry are given in lame catastrophic when they total $25 million or more. And in this next slide, Brett, that didn't come up. Can we go back to that? For some reason, the numbers weren't there. Oh, the graph did not appear for some reason. Back. Okay, we'll stay there anyway. But what this was supposed to show you, in 2018, catastrophic losses accounted for approximately $2 billion. This was a result of many smaller catastrophic losses right across the country. Unlike previous years, no one big event. Noteworthy about 2018 is over half of these losses, 56%, were caused by wind, tornado, and hurricane events. The average amount of damage caused by these events accounted for less than a quarter of catastrophic losses. Before 2016, 2013 was the record breaker. That year, insurers paid out. So the slide, had it been come through, would absolutely show you that the trend of losses is increasing, and I'm sorry that didn't come through on that slide. I do not know why. Major issues affecting home insurance. In Canada, insurers are seeing the impacts of severe weather events that result in more flooding and water damage to homes and businesses. Building resilience and adapting to the effects of severe weather involve all of us, individuals, governments, and private insurers working together. Canada needs to invest in community flood mitigation, including natural infrastructure, as well as revisit building code provisions and improve land use planning. The past several years, as noted, have been marked by intense rainfall events that overwhelmed municipal sewer and stormwater infrastructure. When that happens, basements flood, valuable possessions are destroyed, and people's lives are turned upside down. The risk posed by water is a particular challenge for governments, insurance industry, and consumers. And finally, a call to action. The insurance industry and governments can reduce flood risk as a result of climate change by the following steps: educate and empower consumers to mitigate, improve land use planning, make targeted infrastructure investments, improve building codes, share data, preserve and restore wetlands. On behalf of the Insurance Bureau of Canada, thank you very much, and any questions are my pleasure, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Darrell. Do we have any questions for the delegate? Councillor Bess.
Yes, thank you for your presentation and your data there, which we can highlight in your presentation here. One question I've got, I've seen some of your presentations at conferences. Is the IBC looking at changing their regulations regarding overland flooding? Because I know that's one of the concerns we've seen, especially in Burlington and their flood in 2014. And what I've heard in the Ottawa Valley, where the flooding actually exceeded their 100-year storm flood levels. So basically, you're not even in a floodplain, you still can get flooded. Is there looking at any other changes in their policies?
Colin, I don't speak for the IBC. You'd have to call them directly. I apologize.
Is it something, is the industry
Well, what the industry has done, for example, in the first 28 years in my business, you could not buy water coverage. And if I had, you could not buy water coverage in the province of Ontario. So the industry, if you ask how they responded, as recently as 2-3 years ago, we are now able to include water coverage in people's homeowner policies. So the industry has responded in a positive manner where we were able to say, you're not now. Do they make that available to every floodplain? Not necessarily, Colin, and it depends on where you are located in the province. But it is a new coverage that has only come into the market on 2 years to help homeowners recover and businesses recover from this tremendous impact on their homes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Chalonar, and then.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My question to the delegation is around what the industry is concluding about why they've seen the damage they've seen. Is it because of climate change? Is it because of weather patterns? Is it because of our failure to maintain infrastructure and build where we shouldn't be building? What is it?
John, I think the position of the industry in the report, you'll see there's no question that it is weather related, and the anticipation is that it's a result of climate change. I mean, the trending is, I'm sorry that one slide did not show, but the trending over the years is just continuing. The catastrophic losses as a result of weather, as a result of climate change, is what the IBC is saying what the problem is. So absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, to Darrell, thank you very much. And again, have no issues with regards to the studies, and I think they're quite accurate, as a matter of fact, from what I can determine here. But of course, it's a global issue, climate change. It's just not Canada, it's just not North America, it's not just Europe, it's just not Asia. So I'm just wondering aloud, and I know I heard you say before you don't speak for the industry, but what's happening in some of those other jurisdictions? And I talk about Africa, I talk about, you know, all those different countries that I just alluded to, and I'm sure that they have insurance there, so it's a global thing. So, and I know insurance is very costly. So how are they dealing with it globally? I got a reasonably good handle on how they are dealing with it Canadian-wide, and it's reflected in what it costs you and I for insurance, because no business is in business to lose money, and I'm sure the insurance company of Canada, the insurance companies of Canada aren't at this point losing, but I'm sure if they're not careful, they will. So maybe you could just help me, educate me globally with regards to insurance and how we change that. And I know there's recommendations in here how we might do it, but globally, we're just a little dot on that big map.
Gord, that's obviously a big question, and I think it really comes in the calls to action. I think that we have to start, and I think the start is industry and government working together. If the industry can provide the data and the proof and everything else, and I think that's what's happening in Africa. Sorry, I have no comment, sir. And we understand Canada is a relatively small part of the global picture, but we have to start somewhere, and I think that cooperation of governments and private sector and other interested parties working together to recognize a problem and what can we do to stop that locally, because it is locally. I know that early on in my career with the development of a new community to the south of us, that people's refrigerators and stoves were floating as a result of stormwater runoff and had to be taken out of their houses by Zodiac Boat and the Oakville Fire Department. Now that's late 80s, early 90s, but that's where the infrastructure did not keep up with the new development of Oakville at that time. So I think it's a big issue. I think it's government. I think it's industry, Gord, and I wouldn't have an answer on a global basis this evening for sure.
Any further questions for this delegate? No? Thank you, Darrell.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, everybody.
Next delegation we have is Kim Barrett from Conservation Halton.
All right, good evening, and thank you for having us. As you've noticed, I'm not alone. I'm with Janelle Wepler, who's also with Conservation Halton, and we'll be splitting the 10 minutes this evening. So it's probably not something you think about every day, but at any given time, no matter where you go, you're always in a watershed. So a watershed is the area of land or the catchment that drains to a particular watercourse or a body of water. And right now, we're all within the west branch of the 16 Mile Creek watershed that flows into Lake Ontario. But it's interesting to note that the northern part of Milton actually drains to Lake Erie through the Grand River watershed. So this slide shows Conservation Halton's watershed-based jurisdiction in the outline. The different colors illustrate the watershed boundaries. Our three major watersheds are Grindstone Creek, Bronte Creek, and 16 Mile Creek. And the dark lines represent local municipal boundaries. Now, conservation authorities are explicitly organized on the basis of watershed boundaries, and this provides us with a unique perspective from which to characterize and manage the water and natural resources within our communities. You may be more familiar with our parks and our regulatory functions, but Conservation Halton also collects a lot of data about what's going on in our watershed and how it relates to climate change. So aquatic indicators tell us the end result of the land use practices that are applied within the upstream drainage area. We take water samples to understand its chemical composition at various points throughout our watershed. We also look at what species of fish and aquatic bugs are present in our streams because they tell us more about the longer-term water quality. Water temperature is important because cool water holds more oxygen, and some species can't tolerate warm water conditions. And finally, we monitor channel morphology to track physical changes to the stream over time. Our terrestrial indicators include the classification of vegetation communities and how they change over time, and we use indicator species like salamanders, birds, and frogs that tell us what kind of shape their habitat's in through their presence or their absence in any given area. Forest pests and forest health are also top of mind in recent years with the loss of our ash trees to the invasive emerald ash borer. We also keep an eye on which plant and animal species live here and how they're doing. Halton has a rich biodiversity, but climate change is already influencing how our ecosystems function. So for example, of these 351 bird species, some will become more common with climate change, but others will decline and potentially disappear from the region. The results of our monitoring work are available on our website, and we also produce a watershed report card every 5 years. This document summarizes conditions of a few key indicators: groundwater quality, surface water quality, forest conditions, and impervious cover. And here's a closer look at some of our recent results. Basically, there's too much salt making its way into our aquatic ecosystems, and once it's in there, we can't remove it. It's not like stormwater that you can filter out particulates. Our sensitive species can't handle it, so they become less abundant in the system, and that paves the way for invasive species to move in and fill the void. Warm water and more phosphorus in some areas means more algae blooms and less diverse aquatic ecosystems. So what are the stressors on the landscape in addition to climate change that are influencing the watershed report card scores? When you combine higher levels of impervious surfaces with the increased intensity of storms from climate change, what you get is a higher rate of runoff that can change the characteristics of our streams by eroding them in different ways. Habitat connectivity. It's critical to maintain this in the face of climate change so that animals and plants can adapt by moving into new areas with the right conditions. Poorly planned roads can prevent wildlife and plants from moving where they need to go. So that might sound a little bit gloomy, but the good news is that there are climate change solutions that improve environmental conditions, benefit the people who live in the watershed, and save money. And Drumquin Park is a really great example of such a project. So this is Drumquin Park at the northwest corner of Trafalgar Road and Britannia. And one of the climate-related challenges here is flooding, as you can see in the lower slide. So the bottom picture was taken from Britannia Road, this point right here looking north. And as you can see during the spring thaw, the area basically changes from a stream to a lake. Part of the problem was this small weir, or a small dam, that prevented fish passage and backed up water, and that caused scouring and widening of the creek downstream. And with support from the town of Milton and funding from Union Gas, we removed the weir last year and undertook a major restoration project within the creek and the floodplain, including the reconfiguration of flood storage. The project results in a number of environmental wins, including cooler water temperatures, more diverse habitat, and removal of a barrier to fish movement. There are social benefits in that the project removes a visual eyesore and reduces the risk to people and infrastructure during flood events. There's also an economic benefit. Halton Region is widening Britannia Road, and part of that work involves modifications to the bridge crossing that we just looked at over 16 Mile Creek. And because of the work that we've done here, the size of the required bridge orifice will be smaller and therefore cheaper, resulting in tax savings and cost savings to the taxpayers of the region. This is a project that we're really, really proud of, and we're actually hosting a celebration and project tour this Wednesday, and I would invite all of you to come and check it out. And with that, I'll turn it over to Janelle.
Thank you very much for letting me come and speak today. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate Kim sharing her time with me. So I'll be 5 minutes. My name is Janelle Wepler. I'm the Associate Director of Engineering of Conservation Halton, and today I'll be talking about 3 programs that I'm responsible for: floodplain mapping, flood forecasting and warning, and flood management infrastructure, which is our dams and channels. And that's $100 million in assets, our dams and channels. So floodplain mapping is defined as the extent of flooded lands when flow exceeds the system capacity. Accurate floodplain mapping is an important first step in building flood resilience because it identifies flood risk areas. It also supports flood forecasting and warning, emergency planning and response, infrastructure renewal and flood mitigation works, and planning and land use decisions. The Government of Canada forecasts spending $673 million per year on flood-related disaster financial assistance. Public Safety Canada predicts that between 2017 and 2022, 75% of this funding for weather-related disasters will be spent on flood recovery. The regulated area includes the floodplain and allowance. Conservation Halton uses the regulated area to proactively keep people and property safe and out of the floodplain through Ontario Regulation 16206. And this is a unique regulation that Ontario has, that we keep the public and their property safe. Updated floodplain mapping was identified as a priority through our strategic plan. Our reinvigorated floodplain mapping program was initiated with several watershed studies, including one for urban Milton. This study is led by Conservation Halton, and it includes a technical advisory committee with members from the town of Milton and Halton region. A consultant was hired to provide updated modeling and mapping and will be completed by March of next year. The next line of defense to help protect life and property from flood damages is through structural measures. So Conservation Halton manages 4 dams, and they were built in 1962 to 1973, and they were in response to the flooding caused by Hurricane Hazel in 1954. This hurricane caused 81 deaths and left 3,000 families homeless. These structures also provide low flow augmentation during periods of drought to maintain flows downstream. So 3 of our dams, Scotch Block, Kelso, and Hilton Falls, they provide flood protection to the town of Milton. Protection from flooding is also provided by flood diversion channels. So Conservation Halton owns and maintains 3 channels. The Milton Channel, which you can see up on the slide, another channel in Oakville, and another one in Burlington. These concrete-lined channels divert water from historically flood-prone residential areas. The Milton Channel was designed to quickly convey flows from flood-prone areas within the town of Milton along 16 Mile Creek. It was constructed in 1970, and it's approximately 3 kilometers long. The last line of defense to protect our communities from flooding is through emergency response. Emergency response is a responsibility shared by Conservation Halton, the municipalities, and landowners. Conservation Halton's role is carried out by our flood duty officers, which monitor the weather patterns 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we monitor the watershed conditions to predict flooding potential. We issue flood messages to municipalities, media, and other stakeholders within the watershed, and we also operate our flood control structures. The municipalities communicate Conservation Halton's flood messages and have the primary responsibility and authority to respond to flood emergencies and maintain municipal infrastructure. And the landowners are responsible for keeping aware of media information during flood events and protecting private property. Our strategic plan includes the key objective: enhance public safety through the modernization of flood management operations to protect communities from severe weather and natural hazards. We recognize the need to respond to changes within our watershed conditions. Our monitoring system was originally developed for larger events such as Hurricane Hazel. However, recent storms, such as the Burling storm in 2014, are localized and more intense. We also need to consider increased densities of urbanization and surface hardening of our watershed landscape, leading to increased runoff and more rapid response times. We are implementing modern technologies to improve watershed monitoring, analysis, and prediction of response.
Okay, your 10 minutes is almost up.
Okay, the last slide. I just wanted to provide a brief overview of what we have done. So we historically had 6 gauges that we used to predict the watershed response and monitor the watershed during a rainstorm event. It was also based on analog technology. We have since, in response to the Burlington storm in 2014, you can see that the very intense eye of that storm went right through our gauges. It wasn't picked up. So since then, we've added more gauges, and then we are planning to add even more gauges just so we can better predict that and provide our municipalities with increased lead times to respond to that flooding event. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions from members of council. Councillor Bess.
So thank you both for your presentation. Just on the last item regarding the channelization, we've had some concerns. I know the Conservation Board members here regarding the maintenance of these channels. Are you looking at making any changes in terms of cutting vegetation, clearing out debris? Because that was one of the factors that affected Burlington, was a lot of their channels were just full of vegetation, debris, and basically the water had no place to go.
So the concrete line channels themselves are within Burlington was not the cause of the flooding. The channel in Burlington actually conveyed sufficient flows to keep the areas south of what that it was protecting during that event. They were free of flooding. There is vegetation within all of our channels. And I had a picture there that it does have a tendency to grow vegetation. It's lined concrete, it cracks, you get seeds in there, and then it starts growing. We have reinitiated a program to get on top of that, and we're spraying it, we're cutting the vegetation, and we're addressing priority areas within our available funding.
That's great. It's also cheaper too. Thank you.
Councillor Chaloner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My first question is with respect to the first part of the presentation around the stressors. How many of those stressors are really related to urbanization more than anything else and managing urbanization?
Urbanization is a factor, but climate change is essentially, it intensifies those stressors. So something like, I talked about salt runoff. You know, we're getting more freeze thaws, more precipitation, we're getting more salt applied to roads, and then that gets further exacerbated down the line when it melts and gets into our system. So it's, I take your point that it's not just climate change, but it is an exacerbating factor in many of the stressors that we're seeing.
I would argue that the increased use of salt we're seeing is as a result of the increased population of the community, right?
It's also a liability issue as well.
Yeah,
for sure.
I understand. Yep. The second part of the presentation, you're doing some important work right now. The fact of the matter is that there hasn't been proper floodplain mapping in this province for 45 years, roughly. And I understand that you've recently established a task force, you've received some funding. Can you sort of talk about that?
Sure. So most of our mapping is from the flood damage reduction era, which was from the 1980s. It's been updated in pieces as development goes. So right now we have models, 1,000 models that we manage to be able to have an understanding where it's flooding and how high that gets. So we are in the process now of updating a full watershed. We've just about to finish one of our watersheds in Burlington, Grindstone Creek. Now we're moving on to 2 areas within 16 Mile Creek. One is in urban Milton and one is in Oakville. We are able to get funding. 50% is through federal funding. Unfortunately, that funding ends March 2020. But the other half of it does come from Halton Region. It's funded by Halton Region.
And Mr. Chairman, through you, I'm assuming that the lower municipalities will be involved in that discussion somehow, some way?
Oh, sorry, I should have added that in. Yes, so we have technical advisory committees on all of our studies. So for the town of Milton, we have staff from your engineering department. We also have Halton Region staff participating within that study. So they are also assisting in completing those studies with us.
Any other questions for the delegation? If none, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Councillor Cluett. Or
just a really quick question, and Councillor Chaloner brought up the floodplain mapping, because that's something that, as I sit on the board of Conservation Halton, along with Councillor Meade, DeLorenzo, and his worship, so we're really excited about working on that program and getting, because the floodplain mapping, as you mentioned, is pretty outdated, and it'd be good to get something updated for that. The other things I wanted to talk about, because I know that a lot of people are talking about what basically municipalities and authorities haven't been doing. I'd like to talk about what we have been doing as a good news story, is that it's already been started. And one of them is our tree planting program at Conservation Halton. I just wonder if you can explain to the community what's behind all of that, sort of the strategies and the successes that we've had over the last few years.
Yes, thank you for that question. So since Conservation Authority came into being, we've planted 4.5 million trees, which is a really phenomenal achievement. So this year we're planting about 65,000 trees. In recent years, a lot of our funding has come through the 50 million tree program, which about a month and a half ago, the funding for that program was pulled by the provincial government, and then a couple weeks after that, it was reinstated for 3 years by the federal government. So we're doing a little bit of head scratching and figuring out how to keep that progressing. But for now, it is going to keep moving along. The challenge is that the trees that we plant are about 3 years old, so the nurseries now have assurances for the next 3 years that they'll have, you know, customers for their trees. But when it comes time for them to seed the year after that, then that's when I think some more difficult questions will come down the road. But regardless, you know, we find it's a really popular program. We get tons of update from watershed residents, and I'm hopeful that even without that funding, we can source it elsewhere or just figure it out.
Thank you. I know a lot goes into the tree planting, especially at our waste management site on a yearly basis. We have Scouts Canada who comes out to assist, and that counts in there. But I just wanted the members of the public to know that this stuff is already happening. You know, 4 million trees is a substantial total of what's been done. So congratulations on those efforts, and we look forward to helping it in the future. Thank you.
Any further questions from anybody? No? Okay, this time, thank you. Our next delegate is Linda Maddow. She come forward.
So, Linda Maddaw, 22-130 Robert Street. Okay. Acting Mayor Councillor Malbuff and Mayor Krantz, councillors, interested citizens who are here tonight. I am talking with you tonight in favor of this motion, not as an expert, not as a scientist on the effects of climate change, but rather I am here tonight as a very concerned 45-year resident of the town of Milton, where I've raised my 3 children, and as a teacher, have taught hundreds of children. I talk to you as a grandmother of 9, 2 girls, 7 boys, and as a member of a newly formed grassroots Halton organization called GASP, Grandmothers Act to Save the Planet. And some of my colleagues are with me tonight. We are a nonpartisan group of Halton grandmothers and grandothers who care deeply about the world our descendants will inherit. We are one of numerous grandparent groups that have formed throughout this country and in many other countries. We feel responsible for our part in polluting the atmosphere, and we want to contribute to changing that. We are fearful for the future of our grandchildren. If all of our grandchildren are to enjoy a stable, safe, and satisfying life, then all of us, each individual, every organization, every institution, every level of government, including this council, must commit to accelerating the reduction of pollution and to increasing renewable forms of energy. We believe that this is the most pressing issue we collectively face today. For if we do not radically change the way we live, we will be putting all of our grandchildren's lives at risk. As a retired educator, I believe in lifetime learning. Our group GASP does too, and has committed to learn all we can about climate change, researching the latest information and findings from the leading experts, scientists, and organizations in the field, hearing directly from our local experts, listening to our youth, participating in local calls for new green deals, and to have conversations with others and with our politicians. Less than a year ago, the nonpartisan group, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, issued its starkest warning yet. We have a 10 to 12-year window in which to make deep cuts in emissions to keep the world from continuing to warm. I have to repeat that. We have a 10 to 12-year window to make those deep cuts. That's not very long. Even half a degree Celsius increase will significantly raise the risk of droughts, flooding, severe heat waves, forest fires, rising sea levels, all of which we are experiencing in Canada. In Canada, we are warming faster than the world average. In 2017, Canada ranked 9th in the world, producing 1.6% of the world's greenhouse gases. But as Canadians, per capita, we produce 20.96 tons each and rank number 1, the worst per capita in the world. And that comes from Climate Watch World Resources Institute. Our current target under the Paris Agreement is to slash emissions by 30% below their 2005 level by the year 2030. Recent Environment Canada projections say that we will miss that target under both the current federal Liberal plan and the Conservative opposition plan. All of this has galvanized us, GASP, to take action, to challenge ourselves to make personal change. My list. To encourage others to do their own research, to make their own lists, to share this knowledge, to support responsible corporate partners, and to share in conversations like this one we are having this evening. One of our members found an online climate test where you are asked to rank the solutions to climate change by their effectiveness. I would encourage any of you to try it. It will assist you in making your own decisions for personal change, and I have those links if you're interested. Our children, our grandchildren, and their future happiness is our greatest motivator. Our children, our grandchildren deserve the truth about the earth they will inherit, and we need to listen to their often heartfelt and hopeful voices. We are encouraged that 47 of our Halton Public Schools have earned eco-school status and would like to see all of our schools achieve this status. We will partner locally with our collective grandchildren who have been taking their own action. Imagine 15 and coming and presenting to a council. Amazing. We support the worldwide challenge coming from young people led by 16-year-old activist Greta Thunberg, Fridays for Future, a day to bring attention to the absolute need to act on this climate emergency. We are not alone in our concern for drastic action. In Canada, the latest polls from just last week show that 64% of respondents in Canada agree or strongly agree that climate change is a serious problem. For over a year now, I've been following Canadian atmospheric scientist Katherine Hayhoe. She lives in Texas, studying climate change by crunching the data, analyzing the models to help engineers, city planners, and ecologists quantify that impact. She was named as one of the 100 most influential people in climate policy for 2019. She points out that we have 3 choices: mitigation, adaptation, and suffering. The more mitigation we do, the less adaptation will be required, and the less suffering there will be. We do not want our grandchildren to suffer for the lack of us not getting timely action. I would like to end with a direct quote from this highly esteemed Canadian scientist. The bottom line is this: the world is changing in its response to climate change, but not fast enough. Climate change is affecting you and me right here, right now, in the places where we live. But by working together, we can fix it. Sure, it's a daunting problem. Nobody knows that more than us climate scientists. But we cannot give in to despair. We have to go out and actively look for the hope that we need that will inspire us to act, and that hope begins with the conversation today. So to Councillor Tesser Dirksen and Councillor Best, your motion to declare a climate emergency in Milton has given me that hope, And that hope has inspired me to act by being here tonight. As our local politicians, you are our leaders and advocates here in Milton who can inspire the rest of us to act quickly. We desperately need this hope and inspiration to speed up our collective responses to this global emergency. And I just have to add this quote I just saw today. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Any questions for the delegate? Being none, thank you very much. Next delegate is Eleanor Hayward from the Green Party of Canada, Milton.
Thank you, Town Council. Acting Mayor Melbuff, thank you very much for your time here today. I'm just getting familiar with your system here. How do I get the PowerPoint presentation up? It's there. How do I move forward? Is there clicker? All right, there we go. And I like this quote here by Winston Churchill. It's not use, there's no use saying we are doing what is best. We're doing our best, but you have to do what is necessary, because this is a challenge to us internationally at the level of World War II. We need to do more on all levels of government. I stand before you as one of the co-founders of Milton Green Environmental Association, which co-founded in 2006, and we registered as a not-for-profit association with the government in 2012. And we were a member group of the Halton Environmental Network and partnered on Halton green screens and implemented some projects on the ground under the United Nations Decade on Biodiversity. Our goal was to educate, empower, and engage citizens and residents with sustainable solutions. And I know the term sustainable can mean different things to different people, but it very specifically means a combination of economic, social, and environmental solutions for future generations. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that I am the Green Party of Canada candidate here in Milton, as you mentioned. One thing that I'm really proud of that Milton Green did, some of our members are here in the gallery today, is that Milton Town Council did pledge support of the Blue Dot movement, which is a grassroots movement to encourage the provincial and federal levels of government to enshrine environmental rights into our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I want to highlight some of the points. This was a motion that was presented by Councillor Hamid and seconded by Councillor De Lorenzo in 2015, and I'll highlight: whereas the town of Milton understands that people are part of the environment and that a healthy environment is inextricably linked to the well-being of our community, and that our strategic plan and official plan provide direction to pursue actions and initiatives that promote a safe, livable, and healthy community, as well as those that support a thriving natural environment as a valued community asset to be protected, maintained, and enjoyed. Declaring that all people have the right to live in a healthy environment, including clean air, clean water, safe food, to access nature, to know about pollutants and contaminants released into the local environment, and participate in decision-making that will affect the environment. And that the town of Milton has the responsibility within its jurisdiction to respect, protect, fulfill, and promote these rights. And that part of the official plan review, the town will identify policy options and directions that will promote and/or support, amongst others, improved air quality, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and climate change adaptation. The town shall continue to work with community members, partners, and agencies to take action to protect, restore, and enhance the local environment. And that this pledge and resolution be forwarded to both the Prime Minister and the Premier. And I think money talks to a lot of people in our council and our world in general. And the effects of climate change, of an increasing global temperature, is that it is melting the permafrost in the northern areas, which is creating runaway positive feedback loops, which is going to lead to climate catastrophe, which will cost up to $70 trillion was a study that was published by the World Economic Forum and was outlined by Mr. DeMille earlier through insurance costs. And that anthropogenic climate change means that it is caused by humans and therefore we can address it. I think locally on the ground, this is best illustrated by the fact that the town of Milton decided not to subsidize outdoor skating rinks in 2019 for the first year because it was too warm to continue investing in that infrastructure. And I think that's a shame, and that just illustrates that our world is getting warmer. But why is there all of this misinformation? The Smithsonian website published an article that there is nearly $1 billion flowing into misinformation campaigns, and that is something that we know through evidence that we need to address bravely together. Because since 1968, the American Petroleum Institute was informed by its own researchers at the Stanford Research Institute that melting ice caps, rising seas, and potentially serious environmental damage worldwide was known since the 60s. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change established in 1988, with Milton Green established in 2006. We pledged support of the Blue Dot movement in 2015. Here we are in 2019. We need to do more. This is an emergency. I implore you to take action, because what we promised we were doing is great. We need to reduce our emissions. What we're actually doing is not even as well as what we say we're doing, where Europe is also making more strides forward. But within every crisis, I really do believe there is an opportunity. And if we embrace the opportunity of the clean energy economy, there could be $26 trillion in it for communities that embrace innovation. And I know the Dairy Green Business Park is about to break ground, and there's capacity to attract companies to Milton in order to take advantage of this opportunity. So I implore you to pass this motion to implement the resolutions that it outlines, including considering a full-time staff person in the 2019 budget to implement the Green Innovation Plan that has already been passed, but we need support by council and staff to make sure that emissions are observed and reduced. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for the delegate? Being none, thank you very much. Next, we have Ritskala Boutros from Fridays for Future Milton. Thank you. State your name and address, please.
My name is Ritskala Boutros, and I live at 1042 Barclay Circle. So I come from a group called Fridays for Future Milton, and Fridays for Future is a group that is around the world. There is Fridays for Future Sweden, and Fridays for Future Toronto, Fridays for Future Burlington. So March 2019, in my classroom, we decided that we should create Fridays for Future Milton, because Milton does not have a Fridays for Future, and Milton needs to acknowledge that there is a climate emergency. I have a video I would like to present in front of the council members. Please play the video.
Hello, GA. My name is Ritskala Boutros, and I'm here to educate you all about the group that our grade 6th class of Mrs. Kelly has started, Fridays for Future Milton. In case you didn't know, Fridays for Future Milton is a movement to stop climate change and save the world. But you might know this as global warming. We are not the only town doing this. Toronto, Vancouver, and even Sweden and cities around the world are helping to stop climate change. Now, where did this all start? Since the 1900s, we have had more carbon emissions like CO2 being released into our atmosphere. This has caused more ice to melt and is endangering habitats of polar bears and animals that live near polar ice caps. Our water level is also rising and heating up. Forest fires are spreading more rapidly. By the time it reaches 2050, there will be more deaths by extreme heat. If you haven't realized already, we need to do our part and save the Earth God gave us. What causes climate change? Well, the most obvious answer is that many factories that produce items for money-hungry companies are spewing out so many carbon emissions through their chimney. But not only factories are doing this. Canada is the most fossil fuel producing country in the world, and we need to stop our oil and fossil fuel mining. Why? Well, mining for oil and fossil fuels release a lot of CO2. Did you know Canada produces more carbon emissions than any country in the world? The final reason is because of killing cows and using too much electricity. Now, you might be a bit thrown off. Why killing cows? Well, people think that carbon emission called methane is released from cows burping. That is not true. Methane is released from killing cows. People believe that methane is less powerful than CO2. Well, they're wrong. Methane is 85% more powerful than CO2 in trapping heat, but it breaks down faster. Now that you know what is causing this, let me tell you what you can do to help us stop climate change. Obviously, we can't just quickly stop factories and mining for fossil fuels, but we can do what we can. Once we start doing something, I believe the government will notice and help us in stopping climate change. What we want you to do is, stop eating meat as much, unplug your phone charger when done charging and use it less, play outside more, and pick up garbage that you see is littered around the area. Of course, these are only a few steps to heal the world, but you can help us make a change. With these steps, you can be a helpful steward to the earth God gave us. God didn't give us the earth to destroy it. God gave it to us to live our lives and take care of it. Thank you.
So I'd like to say a few points for the importance of declaring a climate emergency. Okay, well, it doesn't seem to be working, so I'd just say a few points. So if this motion does pass, what will happen is people will listen. When people listen, they know what to do. They will act. And sometimes people will act against fear. And this is an emergency, and it's a crisis. And this can destroy the population of our Earth. As I said in my video, there will be more deaths by extreme heat. So I believe that in many ways, such as the fear of a crisis such as climate emergency, as climate change happening, people will start to act, and people will find ways to continue to help stop climate change. Also, Milton can be an influence to other cities. When other cities find out that Milton has done this and other cities have even done this, such as Paris, I know that is quite far away, but yeah, so now we know that many countries are acknowledging, and the first way that we can bring this motion forward is acknowledging that and knowing that there is a climate emergency and a climate crisis. Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple of questions. Councillor Cluett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. I do remember speaking with you, Councillor Tesser-Dixon and I were at Guardian Angels School not too long ago talking about this very same issue in the Fridays for Milton. I wanted you to talk about a lot of the other things that you're doing with Fridays for Milton, because it's not just making presentations and doing this, but you're also doing other things in our local community about keeping things clean and recycling. So if you can let the people of Milton know exactly what Fridays for Milton is doing.
Yes, so Fridays for Future Milton, every Friday, and we try our best to clean up areas such as parks and other places. Also, we encourage people whenever we can to act like I said, we encourage people to act and help us in trying to save our planet.
Mr. Chair, yes, they've done a lot of local community park cleanups. They were instrumental actually in contacting me to get the green bins from the Halton region sent over to all their portables, because they realized that they were throwing out a substantial amount of waste that could go to our green carts as opposed to going into the landfill. So I just want to congratulate you and the Fridays for Future Milton, and you did a great presentation. Thanks very much.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you. I just wanted to congratulate Rizkallah for doing a very, very wonderful presentation. I loved it. I loved that you used so many pictures. It made it very easy for all of us to understand. Thank you, and congratulations to the parents.
Okay. Any further questions for the delegate? Being none, okay. Thank you very much. Our next delegate is Lisa Kohler from the Halton Environmental Network.
Thank you, Your Worship, councillors, staff, community members. Thank you for the opportunity this evening to talk about the declaration for the climate emergency. My name is Lisa Kohler. I'm the Executive Director of the Halton Environmental Network, otherwise known as HEN. HEN propels programs in our community, free programs that include Greening Sacred Spaces, Halton Green Screens, Oakville Ready, and the Halton Waste Challenge. We are also the backbone agency of the Halton Climate Collective. In my role in our community, I hear from faith-based leaders, business owners, students, and seniors who are speaking up and leaning into action for climate change. I am pleased to say many residents from Milton are having these discussions, and a few of them are here this evening. I'm also here representing the Halton Climate Collective, a team of leaders and engagers from the town of Milton, the town of Halton Hills, the town of Oakville, the city of Burlington, the Halton region, Conservation Halton, the University of Waterloo, the Halton District School Board, the Halton Catholic District School Board, and HEN. We are working together, designing a theory of change that will create transformative change for greenhouse gas mitigation. By aligning our organizations, we have the power to secure diverse funding, embed our community with opportunities to ensure change. Thank you, Milton, for supporting the HCC and by having Laura Nelson as part of our team. Laura is a wonderful addition. She's a supporter, she's a leader, and she's helping us drive tangible action. With this motion to declare a climate emergency, you will embed your community with the capacity and structure for change. You will explore quick wins that are economically responsible and aligned with best practice. For example, by exploring greening your commercial fleet and EV charging stations, you will embed resources for community that have long-term savings. I know the town of Milton has leaned into environmental sustainability through the Town of Milton's Green Innovation Plan. The Community Energy Plan will evaluate energy trends, baseline studies, and your plan will present energy and emissions that will be managed over the next 5 years. You also highlighted continued development of Milton and plans that will both address economic opportunities and environmental alignment. Responsible and well-planned energy consumption leads to efficiencies and cost savings. The motion being discussed this evening validates your previous work and commitments. The motion supports your current work, provides opportunities, and ensures your commitments are aligned. It ensures that the community acknowledges your efforts and highlights the work that needs to be done together to ensure action. The town has an opportunity to move forward to embed the Milton community with resources and opportunity to ensure resiliency and economic growth. By having a staff member dedicated to sustainable management, it will not only align with the HCC, but ensure funding resources from organizations like the Federation of Community Municipalities, the provincial and federal government will be explored, and the capacity to ensure these grants will be developed and designed and implemented, hopefully, in the community of Milton. This evening, we need leadership, we need action, and we need to have a discussion of the reality of climate. We know in Halton it is getting warmer, wetter, and wilder. Since the 1950s, Ontario has seen a 1.5 degree increase in temperature. It's getting wetter. We have a 12% increase in precipitation, and it's getting wilder by increased storms, intensity, and variabilities. We know climate has local impacts as well. It has impacts to health, invasive species, flooding, and insurance losses. We know our climate is changing. We know it's fast spread. We know it's causing widespread, profound consequences for all living organisms. Merrill Lynch, Apple, Starbucks, Munich Re, and hundreds of other international successful businesses are leaning into climate. They're ensuring responsible growth while having a climate lens attached to the majority of their programs. Alongside the business community, we are hearing from the medical community as well. This year, I had the pleasure to hear the President-elect of the Canadian Medical Association, Dr. Sandy Buckman. Dr. Buckman presented the Canadian version of the Lancet report. Dr. Buckman stated that the #1 health concern for all Canadians is climate change. He did state we have no planet B. Climate change is not a political issue. Everyone must support the changes required to mitigate the effects of climate change. This is Milton's opportunity to declare an emergency, have dialogue, tangible actions that will really drive true transformative change. Along with the Halton Climate Collective and HEN, we are all working collaboratively in our community. We've hosted charrettes, book clubs, and we're engaging our community with the Every Action Counts survey. In fact, in Milton, we were at the GO station last week, and numerous citizens stopped and engaged our volunteers in regards to climate action. Citizens need your leadership. They need your motion to ensure they understand that we must work together to effect change. These initiatives, your green plan, will support the climate emergency motion and drive local change. I ask you to vote for the motion and declare a climate emergency. Thank you for the opportunity to delegate.
Thank you. Any questions for the delegation? Councillor Dirksen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Lisa, for your presentation. You mentioned several times funding availability, diverse funding. Can you be a little more specific about what would be available for, I'm presuming, municipalities that undertake green initiatives?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. There are numerous funds that are available through the Federation of Community Municipalities Green Innovation Fund would be one that I would highlight. Also, they have a partnership fund that could be incredibly successful with the HCC. HEN is exploring many different funding opportunities with the federal and provincial government right now. The National Resource Council also, NRC, so the National Resource Canada, also has some funding that would align with any municipality looking in for innovative experiences when it comes to energy right now, so that would be a good opportunity for Milton as well. And then there's other opportunities with the Halton Climate Collective. For instance, we're exploring opportunities with the University of Waterloo, the university, and some other universities around SSHRC opportunities that will embed some resources in our community as well.
I'm not sure if this would be an appropriate time to ask a question of staff, but I'm just wondering if any of those funding opportunities have been considered, or do we know about them, or have we applied for them, or can we?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we are aware. We're constantly scanning the environment and checking with our counterparts at the provincial and federal level, looking for different opportunities that we can pursue that fit with our current plans.
Thank you. And have we had success?
Yes, we have. Over the course of 2018, that was the year that we were successful in obtaining grant funding to be able to produce the Green Innovation Plan, as well as we were able to secure funding to start to transition some of our Olympia ice reservoirs over to electric and get off of natural gas. So that project is just going to come to fruition later this year, and we will have those machines in place for the fall.
Last question.
You have a question for the delegate?
No, sorry, Lisa. Thank you very much. Can I ask my question? In your opinion, is there more that we could be seeking out? And if so, maybe why aren't we?
Through the chair, there's obviously always more that we could probably be doing. Right now, we manage the current portfolio of what I'll call sustainability, which, as previous delegates have alluded to, is sort of all-encompassing. Some municipalities use dedicated resources. We don't have a dedicated resource on this portfolio, so it's sort of as our resourcing and our staffing capabilities. It takes time to apply for grant funding, for example, and I'm sure Mr. Cowan would agree with me. Even when we applied through the Green Innovation, for the Green Innovation Plan, it was quite extensive to complete.
Last question, I promise. You mentioned other municipalities that have dedicated resources. Could you just expand on that? And
through you, Mr. Chair. Other Halton municipalities do have, the 3 other municipalities do have dedicated resources. I believe Halton Hills has 1 resource, Burlington has 2 resources, and Oakville has 4 resources.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, back to the delegations. Okay, our next delegate is Ms. Olga Sucham. If you'll come forward, please.
Good evening, Acting Mayor, councillors, staff, and residents who are here tonight. The notice of motion in regard to the climate emergency should include specific mention of the negative impact that aircraft greenhouse gases and their emissions have on health and the community here in Milton. If we could. So the question I'm asking is, what about aircraft greenhouse gas emissions? Currently, there is no way to collect data on the gas emissions from the low-flying aircraft in our area. What we do know is in 2018, there were 18,461 noise complaints about low-flying aircraft. To compare that to June of this year, which is only a half a year, there already have been 13,816 noise complaints. To project that to the end of 2019, we probably are looking at 28,000 noise complaints, which is a 50% increase.
The motion is concerning...
It is, and this is part of it.
It has nothing to do with the noise issue. No, the noise. So if you could get to...
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is to show that we have data about low-flying, polluting aircraft, and I'm going to get to that if you can give me a moment. This is the background information to that. What we don't have in our community is permanent noise monitoring terminals, which would give us an accurate picture of air traffic over Milton, since it would provide the data on a 24/7 basis. So we would know how many low-flying, greenhouse polluting aircraft fly over Milton. Right now, we don't have that. What we do have is that aircraft fly under 2,000 feet, and that aircraft noise can be as high as 78 decibels. when we look at the low-flying aircraft that fly over Milton, they use conventional jet fuel, a variety of hydrocarbons. Kerosene, both leaded and unleaded, is the main component. There are additives such as benzene, which is a carcinogenic. There is sulfur, and there are many other polluting, harmful additives to conventional jet fuel. That is what is coming out of these low-flying aircraft over Milton. What is coming out of these airplanes is equivalent to the diesel fuel used in vehicle transportation, including buses. This motion calls for a conversion from the diesel buses that are used now to electric buses. So here we have converting our buses, but flying over Milton, and we are talking about thousands of low-flying aircraft spewing out hydrocarbons, kerosene, benzene, sulfur, and so on. So what we're doing at the ground level, we're not thinking about what's happening up above. Aircraft emit a staggering amount of CO2s. A 747 jet uses 63,000 gallons, or 238,481 liters of jet fuel. A Boeing 767 burns 90,000 gallons, or 34,069 liters of fuel on one cross-country trip. An airline trip to London, England, and back generates 1.4 tons of CO2, the equivalent of 3 months driving a typical automobile, which would be rated at 22 miles per gallon. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPP, has stated that aircraft cause 2.5% of global warming, and they're projecting a 15% increase in the future. David Suzuki Foundation claims that aircraft cause 4 to 5% total climate change. And since 1990, CO2 emissions from aircraft increased by 83%. So there is ample evidence to support that aircraft emissions are contributing to climate emergency, which is addressed in the notice of motion. However, there is no specific mention of the greenhouse gases emitted by aircraft and its negative contribution to the climate and to the health and well-being of people. There should be mention that the aircraft industry should be exploring cleaner fuels such as biofuels, batteries, solar power, hydrogen, and until this is done, the aircraft industry will not seriously explore cleaner fuels. There doesn't seem to be any research into biofuels as it relates to aircraft in Canada, but in other parts of the world there are. For example, the use of biofuels has been reported from African Airways, which flew aircraft from Johannesburg to Cape Town on a biofuel made from nicotine-free tobacco plants. The only way the aircraft industry is going to start seriously exploring cleaner fuels is by pressure applied on the industry from such measures as the notice of motion before council tonight. Quality Airspace for Campbellville Milton is asking that consideration be given to include a statement in the motion that more research is needed into alternative aircraft fuels. This is important since the notice of motion is having widespread distribution, and the impetus for more research will only start when it is pointed out that the aircraft industry needs to do more to mitigate the climate emergency which it contributes to. Thank you.
Any questions for the delegation? Being none, thank you. Okay, our next delegate, Barry Colbert.
Is my presentation, did it make it in time? Who's running that? Okay, I have it on here. Set my time here so I don't go over. Good evening, Council. I was invited to speak. My name is Barry Colbert. I'm a professor of business strategy at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo Region, and I was invited to speak by Councillor Tesser-Dirksen just to comment. It's actually the first time we've met. Hi, nice to meet you. We've been corresponding by email. To comment on the motion and just what I said I would do is come and talk to you about some of the things that we talk about, that I talk about in the business school from a business perspective. We've heard a lot of good presentations tonight from various perspectives, so I'm going to stick to the business perspective. So if we can pull up the slides, have you got them there? Yeah. Okay, and clicker is here. So as I said, I'm at the Lazarus Business School. Now, when I teach sustainability to MBA students, I don't teach from a CSR perspective and let's try to mitigate harm. We look at it as a strategic business opportunity. And so I just want to hit on a couple of points here tonight. We're thinking about it as a strategic business opportunity. You don't necessarily want to just focus on cost and risk reduction, which we have heard a lot of tonight, and it's all true. It's all useful information, and there's opportunity there for cost savings. What I want to talk about, though, is the need to expand our mindsets and to think in terms of opportunities and how conversation is a big driver of that. In other words, what we talk about drives what we do. So what I thought I'd just talk about is a little bit of that from a book that some colleagues and I wrote, just a quick picture just to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about, and then some examples of what we have going on in Kitchener-Waterloo. This is the book here, Reconstructing Value, Leadership Skills for a Sustainable World. So we come at these issues from a leadership perspective and from a value creation perspective, and reconstructing how we think of value. So this is just chapter 6. It's from a study we did. I'm just going to use one picture here to illustrate something. This is, we went out and interviewed about 150 business managers, and we heard tonight that people think about sustainability in different ways, and that's what we were trying to ascertain here, is how do business managers talk about sustainability? And in the end, we rolled up all of the data, and we come up with this 2x2. So it's really this dimension on the two outsides that I want to focus on. The reductive is a focus on trade-offs. So if we look at environmental issues and say, yeah, well, that's all well and good, but this stuff's going to cost us money, then we're kind of living at that side of the continuum. What we want to be trying to do is focus on the integration of, can you have a win-win-win between environment, social, and economic factors? And if you only carry around a trade-offs mindset, you will find trade-offs. There's always trade-offs, but you won't see the win-win opportunities. And so it's, how do you drive conversations more over to that integrative side, and get some payoffs and not just trade-offs. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of things we're doing. This is, it blows out into this graph, and all of these four kind of conceptions of sustainability are illustrated in here. And really all this is just a field of conversation. So what I encourage, what we've been doing for 10 years now in Waterloo Region, is shifting the conversation about how we talk about sustainability as an opportunity and not just a price we have to pay. So here's a couple of examples. Key point I want to take out of these is all of these involve multi-sector collaboration among business, municipal government, of which there are 3 in Waterloo Region, I know you're aware. So that gets complicated. But we've had quite a bit of success there with all 3 councils and the regional government as big supporters and partners with us. And when I say us, I chair the board of Sustainable Waterloo Region that I'm going to talk about here. It's an NGO in town. And it was created by Laurier business students in 2009, and we're 10 years in. Now they have 8 full-time employees and about 70 volunteers. They're pretty active every year. So I think an important point here is if you're going to have partnerships among civil society, business, and municipal government, you have to have somebody dedicated to that and have a coordinated effort from city staff. Here are just some of the programs that we have at Sustainable Waterloo Region. So we have this Regional Sustainability Initiative. I'll show you what that is in a minute. It's mitigating carbon emissions, waste, and water use. We have TravelWise that we run, which is the Transportation Demand Management Program we run for the region. Climate Action WR, we've got all 3 city councils and the municipal governments unanimously support an 80% by 2050 target. And then we're backcasting from there to say, well, what about 2040 and 2030, and what are our goals all the way along, and putting plans in place to make that a reality. Charge WR is a build-out of our electric infrastructure, electric vehicle infrastructure, including charging stations, and I'll show you a picture of some of those in a second. Evolve One and Evolve Green are probably the more exciting things we've done more recently. Evolve One is Canada's first net positive multi-tenant office building, and Evolve Green is a clean tech incubator. And Sustainable Waterloo Region, we sort of brought that. We're a convening organization, and in partnership with the cities and the region, we brought these incubators into being. So I'll show you some of that. This is these are some of the logos of companies that are involved. So we have 75 businesses involved in making commitments, public commitments, and then third-party tracking on greenhouse gases, waste, and water. And then we've got other on the side there. So we've got pledging partners, and we've got observing organizations which are putting pledges together. They've got their toe in the water, and they're going to make pledges. We've got capacity building organizations that are sort of sustainability curious, I would call it, and they want to know what could be in it for our business. And then we've got an e-score reporting that's based on the B Corp's indicator, which really all is just to get conversation going in these businesses to say, how can we participate in this? So 75 organizations actively participating, and we run events that educate them. We train them on how to calculate your greenhouse gases, that sort of thing. And then we run an annual evening of recognition. TravelWise is our TDM program, and you can see our hybrid buses there. These are some companies that are involved. You'll see Laurier logos up there a lot, because Laurier is a big partner in a lot of these. Here's the Evolve One building. So this is just opened in November. We started the planning for this, or I should say kind of rabble-rousing for this around 5 years ago. And it's just been put in, it opened its doors last November, ribbon cutting. It's, as I say, Canada's first net positive energy, zero emissions, multi-tenant office building. So what you've got there is a 120,000 square foot building. It's on the back campus of University of Waterloo. And it produces about 108%, I think, of its energy requirements. It's got a big geothermal system underneath it, so it's off the grid energy-wise. You can see all the solar panels there. I think there's 128 parking spaces underneath the solar panels, including 30-some-odd charging stations, and more roughed in for later once we get more uptake on the electric vehicles. The other neat thing about this is that it's EY Canada is the anchor tenant. And there are several other businesses located inside. We also have space there at Laurier. We do research in there. We have University of Waterloo has some space in there, and their climate change centers, and WISE, which stands for Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Energy. So it's a collaboration space, and that's important because 40% of the floor space on the main floor is a clean tech incubator. So we've got, and this is with the accelerator center that's across the parking lot. So we've got, I think, 10 companies in there now, startup companies just focused on sustainability-related issues. And these are, and we've got room for 40, so it's 10 going to 40 over the next few years. We're having another intake soon. So this becomes not just what's sustainability going to cost us, but how do we see this as a business opportunity to make the planet a better place and make money at the same time. These things are not trade-offs always. Here's the ribbon cutting for Evolve. That was for Evolve 1, but Evolve Green was in February, and February 1st. It was one of the coldest days we had this year, and as the, you see Mayor Dave Jaworski there on the left of Waterloo, as the, I forget who was speaking, one of the MPs or mayor, and then the dean came up, the dean of environmental studies, and she said, we've had to just send students home from the Waterloo campus because it's too cold, because the gas pipe that comes in isn't big, it's only this big, and it can't heat all the buildings. And we were all toasty warm over in this building, and they had to shut the geothermal system off because it was getting too warm, and it was costing us nothing really to run. That Evolve Green incubator space is, I'll give a couple of examples of companies that are in there now. One I don't have a picture of, I'll just tell you about, is that it's things like taking plastic bottles. We've heard a lot about the plastics issue lately, and saying, how do we upgrade the PET, which is typically not a very a good product to upgrade. It usually is pretty brittle when you try to recycle it. But they have a chemical, proprietary chemical process. They can upgrade it and actually make it better plastic and then use it in 3D printing. And they're using it to print prosthetic limbs right now for in developing countries as their first application. And so, so you see these kind of closed, virtuous circle sort of ideas that are coming out here. Here's the sort of mandate for Evolve Green: inspire change, lead innovative research, and accelerate commercialization. Those are mock-up drawings. We've actually got real, it's open now and running. And so I'll have to update.
You're down to a minute.
Picture here. Yep. Others in the region, 11X, local water monitoring via Internet of Things technology, and the City of Waterloo has engaged them to help reduce their water consumption. MyoVision is another. They are working in 80 countries now, but they're based in Waterloo, and the economic value is being generated in Waterloo. They have also, MyoVision has also opened this Catalyst 137, 450,000 square feet of space, which is Internet of Things makerspace, and a good chunk of it is focused on green technologies. So I'll just wrap by saying, I was actually surprised to find out that you don't have a dedicated staff person working on sustainability. I don't know how we would have done a lot of this without that. And so so I encourage you to adopt this motion.
Okay, thank you for your, any questions for the delegate? Councillor Challar, one moment, sir.
Yeah, so I guess the net of the presentation through you, Mr. Chairman, is if you can create a business case for environmental sustainability, business will climb aboard and operate in a sustainable fashion and create technology that supports environmental sustainability. Is that the net of it?
Yes, yes, and even in the mitigation programs I talked about at the beginning there, Sustainable Waterloo Region has 8 full-time employees, and how are they funded? It's through, about 50% of it is through memberships from businesses. So businesses are paying an annual fee to be a part of this because they're seeing business value come back in several ways. There's cost savings on some of their energy use. It's reputational gain. It's talent attraction because people want to work for green companies.
Just one point of clarification. PET plastic, unless it's contaminated, is the most recyclable product and most valuable product in the blue box. Today, across the country, more than 70% of PET plastic is recycled. It's used time and time and time again as a plastic bottle, but it can also be used for a bunch of other things, including clothing. So
and
if you want more information on that, glad to provide it. But there certainly is packaging that is not as environmentally friendly, but PET is not one of those forms of packaging.
Councillor Tricia Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Colbert, for coming in. I know you're used to having hours to talk about this stuff to your classes, and you've condensed it into
13 weeks normally, yeah.
Okay. The question I have actually is about your classes. What's enrollment like in these programs?
Well, since January, I've had 150 students come through. This is MBA students, and I teach a fourth-year class as well in our program. Very popular elective, and most who come through, the most frequent comment I get is this should be part of the main core that all students have to take. I'm not eager to have that many more students, but that is a comment that comes back. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Any further questions? Being none, thank you. That's the last delegate we have on record, but I understand Councillor Tricia Dirksen.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I am going to request a motion to have one last delegate speak. He did not register, Mr. Peter Lambrick. We do need, I believe, a simple majority to allow him to speak, so I'll put that out.
Second by Councillor Bess. All right, so we'll take a vote to let the delegate speak. It takes at least 5 in support. All those in favor? That passes. So I would ask Mr. Peter Lambert to come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Your Worship, members of council. Thanks for that. I have a few handouts like that. I've just put read as we go or afterwards. I'm very pleased to see the last council is getting around to bringing this very important matter. As most people realize, agriculture is very weather dependent, and therefore we are in the bullseye most of the time. From an agricultural perspective, there's likely going to be opportunity for increased production, but along with that comes the vagaries of what the weather's going to throw to us. And as we have seen this spring, there are thousands of acres just south of town here that didn't get planted. When you take that example, and because in the States they didn't get 5 million acres of crop in, that then becomes a bigger issue on production and pricing. As far as making adaptations are concerned, I think agriculture has always moved ahead, and whether it's our plant breeders using all the tools available to them, whether it's soggy roots, whether it's heat stress, or whether it's aphid damage and other diseases, they will find ways of trying to get around what's going on. But for other industries, such as beef, which was fingered here tonight as being bad for methane gas and health, there's a sector of the economy that will likely suffer. Technology has definitely helped, and I think agriculture has used such things as precision ag, adaptations, planting and spraying and harvesting to help us both in saving on inputs and maximizing production. We use the most efficient motors that are available to us, but we, like other sectors, will have to continue to use fossil fuels until new technology can be found. On those USB sticks, you will find a report from Durham region where the agriculture and policymakers got together there and are moving forward on issues that will help in climate change. And I would like to think that if there's a committee struck here, that agriculture could be a member of that, because I think we have things to offer. There's also on that stick where the Federation of Agriculture is on some of these issues as well. In my mind, this resolution is a lot better now than it was. However, I think you do need to focus it and stick to your knitting as to what you actually, as councillors, can do through official plan, etc. And I think agriculture, when I think of what you have immediately south of town here in your wastewater treatment plant and your solid waste, that there's a lot of energy that is not being utilized down there, and a lot of gases maybe that are given off down there which can be captured. And when you have your town fairly close to it, you know, what could you do if you were better utilizing some of those components of heat and energy? So there's a lot moving forward. I hope that you will vote for this motion, and that it's not just a feel-good situation. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Lambert? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Peter, you had mentioned that one illustration you had mentioned about you suggest we stick to our knitting. Give me one or two other illustrations how we might just stick to our knitting. And I think you're focusing on what we should be doing within you know, a realistic approach and within common sense. So help me understand, or help us understand what you're talking about. And I heard you mention about the cattle industry, and of course not only the beef, where it was suggested that we eat less of that earlier on, and how that might affect the industry, but just cattle. What about the milk industry, and what about the ice cream industry, and all that that's related to agriculture? There's just tons of them there. So I don't want to gloss over stuff like that that's so important to society in general.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, the milk industry is huge, and I think over the years it has put a lot of good bones together. However, the latest iteration of the Canada Food Guide sort of maligned its use. So agriculture is getting sort of sideswiped from some issues. We aren't squeaky clean. You know, we emit a lot of products into the air, but you know, there is a situation where a country does need to feed itself. So from that standpoint, as to what I was meant by sticking to your knitting, was there are only certain things that as a municipality you can do. However, you know, try to focus. Try to focus. I want to see this move forward, but I think it needs a tad more focus than what is there at the present time.
Councillor Best?
Yes, Peter, thank you for your presentation, for your service, and we've served on a few committees together. Just when you mentioned at the start there about some of the examples, could you highlight some of the changes you've seen in the climate and agriculture in the area? Because I know we spoke earlier about, you know, how wet a spring it was. How is it comparing over the last few years, and the effect of the weather on agriculture that you've seen over the last 10, 20 years?
This is the first year, sir, that I have not been able to get all my land planted in a timely fashion, because there does become a cutoff date when, yeah, you might get lucky and a crop will finish before the frost. But we're putting big dollars into the ground, and so you know, you say well, in my case, June 20 was as late as I wanted to go. And this is why land south of town didn't get planted, because it wasn't going to be feasible.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the delegate? Being none, thank you very much. Okay, that's it for the delegations. So I believe the procedure is I will read the motion and then open it up to members of council for comments. So, moved by Councillor Tesser Dirksen, seconded by Councillor Best. Be it resolved, whereas the planet we share is the only known current home of humanity, and the planet's health and responsible care is an issue of paramount importance, which transcends political philosophies and ideologies. And whereas the majority of scientific literature and evidentiary speech to languages, English is the best, huh? Evidentiary compendia state that the Earth is undergoing a significant and potentially irreversible environmental change, which bears a direct effect on human health and productivity, of which human activity since the Industrial Revolution is deemed a major cause. And whereas the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has determined the need for a significant and structural reduction in carbon emissions in the next 11 years to avoid further economic, ecological, and social damage. And whereas Canada is, according to the Environment Canada's April 2019 Changing Climate Report, recording warming at twice the rate of the rest of the planet, with northern Canada experiencing 3 times the increase in average temperature compared to the global average, which could result in infrastructure failures and inadequacies linked to climate change, which, if not reconsidered, revised, or retrofitted, may cost Canada $300 billion over the next decade. And whereas enrollment in post-secondary programs for degrees and diplomas in environmental study, science, sustainability, renewable resources, and green jobs has increased steadily as the climate crisis resonates with many Canadians who recognize the changed climate realities of our province as well as opportunities. And whereas many local citizens, community groups, organizations, schools, and neighborhoods are taking collective action on the climate change emergency, and a formal declaration from their elected representatives will foster resonance with their efforts. And whereas adoption of carbon neutrality is a modern, logical, scientifically sound, and socially and economically beneficial endeavor, which the town of Milton has proactively embraced in its own social and economic benefit by setting goals for town operations through the Green Innovation Plan. And whereas local governments hold the power and direct relationships with citizens to educate, modify, and mitigate the human activity that contributes to climate change, including creating low-carbon communities and calling on senior levels of government for responses which are suitable to the urgent nature of our climate reality. And whereas the town of Milton has recognized the need for efficient and comprehensive addressing of climate impacts, and specifically of energy consumption and conservation, as well as emissions of town assets through the adoption of the Green Innovation Plan, which plan lays the policy framework and principles for mitigating climate change impacts, and requires ongoing accountability measures, review, action, and implementation in order to reach its full impact. And whereas the time horizon of private citizens, decision makers, and political influencers must look beyond our own lifetimes and consider the cost of our actions in our ongoing social contract and legacy to future generations. Now be it resolved that the town of Milton declares a climate emergency, and that climate change mitigation is an immediate and continued priority for the municipality, as well as in the interest of partnerships with our sister municipalities in Halton, and to fulfill its social obligations to act in the best interest of the town of Milton and its citizens. And be it further resolved that Council direct this resolution to staff in order to undertake the following actions. To include a staff resource dedicated to sustainability and energy management in the 2020 budget for Council's consideration. Direct staff to inquire and provide Council with a report as to long-term potential cost benefits of transitioning town's fleet to electric vehicles where possible. And that staff provide an annual update to Milton Council on corporate initiatives related to climate change mitigation. That staff consider all opportunities to include language in future policy planning work that acknowledges climate change. That staff are directed to inquire and provide Council a report as to what the town of Milton can do to strongly encourage the development community to include EV charging stations in future medium and high-density applications. And be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be circulated to the region of Halton, local Halton municipalities, Halton District School Board, Halton Catholic District School Board, the Halton Climate Change Collective, Halton Environmental Network, Halton Members of Parliament, Halton Members of Provincial Parliament, Association of Municipalities of Ontario, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the Climate Mobilization Organization, Partners of Climate Protection, Global Covenant of Mayors, the Provincial Minister of the Environment, and the Federal Minister of the Environment. That's the resolution, members of Council. Anybody wish to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to keep my comments short because really everything I've had to say is encapsulated within the text of the motion and been stated by delegates as well, whom I want to thank very much because I think every person brought something unique to the conversation. And I appreciate which perspectives each of you brought. This motion has gone through a few iterations, as Mr. Lambrick mentioned. It started out a bit broader, and in working with staff, stakeholders, and some of my fellow councillors, we've managed to revise it and bring it down into something that I feel is more focused and really encapsulates what we can do here around this council table. I also want to recognize Councillor Di Lorenzo because he had a motion in the works around the same time and very graciously allowed me to proceed with mine, so thanks for that, Rick, as well. Suffice it to say, our climate is changing. We have strong evidence that human activity is the major contributing factor, and this motion presumes those as points of fact. I'm not a climate expert either, and I don't have a background in science, but when I need a professional medical opinion, I defer to the experts, and that's what I've done here. I've deferred to the experts, their opinions, and the research that's been brought forward by a majority of those experts. Milton's the only municipality in Halton that has not declared a climate emergency. I believe we're close to 700 Canadian municipalities at this point, but I could stand corrected on that have passed declarations. It's a message that we need to send, a message that says we recognize there's a need for urgency, a need for immediate action, and we're doing a lot, actually. There is stuff that we're doing, but the message, I feel, is not resonating with our actions, and that's the point of this motion. Rather than exclusively relying on national governments and global organizations to solve the problem, we can recognize and embrace that we have the ability at a local level to make small changes that will add up. The mayor mentioned that we're just a small dot on the map. Well, that map is comprised of millions of small dots, of which we are one. And let's not underestimate ourselves. We're one of the fastest growing municipalities in Canada. Let's not underestimate our influence and our reach with our own citizens and beyond. So I'm hoping that the motion will be supported by my colleagues. It's obviously supported by a large group of people in our community here tonight and outside. And I want the motion to move forward to show that we can partner with our citizens and our communities and other stakeholders. And that's really what the motion is all about. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm predicting the motion will pass unanimously. Okay. I'm predicting that. I don't know. I've not lobbied any of my colleagues, and I've not been lobbied as well. Mr. Chairman, I recognize the climate was changing at least 50 or 60 years ago. This is nothing new. This absolutely is nothing new. I was in the oil business for well over 20 years. I helped to contribute to that. Everybody knew that at that time, including me. But the gas car is still here, and I predict it'll be here for another 20, 30, 50 years. How many of us have an electric car here tonight? I know I don't. I know I don't. Maybe the odd one of us does. But until we start taking it very serious, every one of us, an electric cars, and I only use that as an example, you know, things aren't going to get any or much better. So is the big three or the big five or how many, are they going to quit making gas-guzzling automobiles? I don't know. Maybe that's the thing that has to be done, not only here in Canada, but across the globe. Then we'd be making some steps in changing that climate. Do we have to get radical? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's been changing and will change for a period of time, so I understand what you have to do. Now, Mr. Chairman, one of the, and I have a bit of a concern, and I will support this, but maybe the mover and second can help me. I'm really concerned about us short-circuiting the budget process. I really am. And that refers to item number 1, and be it further resolved, that to include a staff resource dedicated to sustainability and energy management in the 2020 budget for council consideration. And I know council consideration changes that. But if this passes the way it is, staff has no other option than including that. And that's where it comes from short-circuiting the budget process. And there's another item that we're going to be dealing with later this evening that'll have the same effect. So I just caution my colleagues on what we might be doing. It's a dangerous precedent, Mr. Chairman, there. Now, one of the other things that I want to be very clear on, I attended at least 2 conferences. Both of them were weeks, and I'm talking about the Emergency Measures Act of Canada. So I know what emergencies are all about. I was also a volunteer firefighter for 21 years, and I know what emergencies are. So maybe the mover and seconder can just drill right down what's the immediate thing that we can do to, you know, head off this emergency. And again, you heard me say, as a firefighter, if there was a fire, that was an emergency. You looked at it right away. You didn't wait. Or if somebody was drowning or stuff like that in those emergencies, you dealt with it in seconds. So how are we going to deal with this one? And it's an emergency. So I want to know how we collectively are going to do it. And I'm supporting this motion too. But let's clearly understand. I just don't want to go through the motion for sake of going through the motions.
Thank you. Concerning your first question, I'll check with the CFO, because the way I read it, interpret the motion, we're not committing to that person. It would have to go through the budget process and be brought forward by staff, and then council would decide. But that won't happen until the 2020 budget. That's my understanding. Yeah. Could I get clarification from the CFO, please?
Yeah, so I agree with that. I read this as the decision point being the budget process. It just ensures that the information is there for council to make the decision at that time.
And, Mr. Chairman, I understood that very clearly. But normally what councils of the past and the present does, they leave that up to staff to bring forward a budget at that particular point in time. So this is where we're deviating, and possibly we're doing it a little bit later on. That's my only point. So I'm just cautioning us to be careful, you know, what we're doing.
I believe staff is under the impression that we're not circumventing the budget process, and that it will have to come forward.
No, and just if it provides some comfort, there is some precedence for this. We have done it in last year's budget, for example, where we brought forward options related to support for councillors, administrative supports. So again, it was just bringing the information and allowing the decision process to happen at that time.
And that's right, but staff brought that forward. Staff brought that forward. That's my point.
Point taken, Mr. Mayor. Now, for your second part of the question, Councillor Dirksen or Councillor Best?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about the use of the word emergency. I think what we have to do when we are thinking about climate emergencies is not think on our own human time scale, but think on an ecological, or the ecological time scale. the global time scale. So a human lifetime is a blink of an eye in the lifetime of our planet. Now, whereas, a fire bristling up in an hour or 20 minutes, that's an emergency for us. What's happening right now is an emergency for the planet on the ecological timescale. I mean, if you think that in the past 100 years, since really coal use and carbon emissions have increased with fossil fuels being combusted, this last 100 years has been, I guess, the spark with the tinder in the fire analogy. And now we realize that there is an emergency because the thing's smoldering and it's getting hotter. So if that analogy speaks to those who don't want to go forward with the emergency terminology, I'm hoping that it kind of broadens your perspective a little bit when we're talking about these very large time frames. And lucky us, we just happen to be at the point in time where, we're dealing with the emergency now, and are we going to do something about it, or are we not?
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'd like the mover and the seconder of this motion to think about splitting it in half. The first half from the second half, emergency by itself, and what you're proposing council do as a second part. I have no problem in principle with the second part of the motion. I have a serious problem with the first part of the motion. And let me provide some context. I think it's important that people understand a little bit about my background in terms of what I'm going to say. 30 years ago, I was involved with a citizens committee that worked with Halton Region to bring in the blue box. In the early 90s, I was involved in helping to establish a recycling organization that kept computers in Canada. They didn't go to China to be recycled. They stayed in this country. And to the best of my knowledge, today that is still the case. The consortium that represents the computer manufacturing industry in Canada recycles everything in that computer in this country, and it stays in this country. I've sat on 5 industry recycling boards in the last 15 years, all of them dedicated to beverage recycling, mostly in Western Canada. The one that I'll focus on is the Canadian Beverage Recycling Association. It now manages the most successful recycling program, not in Manitoba, not in Canada, but in the world. This is a program that we could have had in Ontario, but the minister at the time, Glenn Murray, was not interested. It wasn't in his top 10. He told me in a meeting in Niagara-on-the-Lake that recycling was not one of his top 10 priorities. The climate was essentially a carbon tax. And so, I want you to know that I have a long history when it comes to this, and I have a great concern about the word emergency. The history of this resolution comes from an American activist organization called 350.org. I take Councillor Tesser-Dirksen at her word about the first part of this motion and her interest, but that's not where this came from. That's not how it arrived in Ottawa in June. 350.org had put a lot of pressure on the federal government to pass this emergency crisis resolution. I believe that mankind is having an impact on our climate. Whether or not it's an emergency, I'm not really certain of that. Can Canada have a definitive impact? I don't believe that we can. I think there are things that we need to do as Canadians that we are doing. This municipality, as long as I've been associated with it, has been taking steps to become as environmentally responsible as it possibly can be, and it is. And the plan it passed last year supports that, but the work that's been going on in this municipality has been going on for 30 years, and it has to continue. And everything that I heard tonight from the public, you have to continue to do what you do too. But the fact of the matter is, if we shut down 60% of our industry tomorrow, we won't meet the target, the Paris target. That's a fact. This was a target that was set by Prime Minister Chrétien, supported by Prime Minister Harper, supported by Prime Minister Trudeau, but it won't achieve the target. Frankly, and this is something my parents taught me a long time ago, you can't come to the table with a problem, you got to come to the table with a solution. And the fact of the matter is that there is no other country on this earth that has better solutions to this issue than Canada. Now, I'm going to give you three, and I don't know why they're not being talked about, and one of them isn't all that new. In the 70s, we were selling nuclear power around the world. India was one of the countries that was one of the first countries to buy our reactors. The fact of the matter is that had China purchased our nuclear technology instead of building coal plants, we might not be having the conversation we're having this evening. It may be a different conversation, but the fact of the matter is we wouldn't see the level of air pollution, the amount of carbon that we're seeing in our climate that we are today. And frankly, Canada has the ability, as does the United States, to accelerate the use of nuclear energy around the world and finance it. And when you think of all the things we do to finance the third world, to help it along, to help it become part of the first world, we could spend half that amount of money and frankly solve the environmental problem we have today by just changing the energy source. The second thing is Canada is a leader in carbon capture technology. And we aren't investing enough as the federal government in marketing this technology around the world. And it too would serve us as an interim measure until we straightened out the energy requirement. And so you stick that technology beside a coal plant in China or India or elsewhere in the world where there are coal plants, the US just south of us, this would mitigate a lot of the challenges we see. It's new technology, it's not being considered as seriously as it should be. The third thing isn't so new. It's an area that I'm intimately familiar with, and it's recycling. Best recycling country in the world today is not Germany, it's Canada. We passed Germany 5 years ago. Not well known. Could we be doing better? We could be doing a lot better. You know, if the province of Ontario had listened to my organization 5 years ago, yes, we'd still be having this conversation tonight, but people wouldn't be talking about plastic lying on the ground. They wouldn't be talking about, can I have recycling in a park? Can I have recycling in my business? It would be funded at no cost to taxpayers by business. And I was glad to see the professor here tonight. As much as there could have been a little more clarity about his presentation, I think that the point was that you need to engage the business community. There has to be a legitimate business case. There has to be a return in order to get the environmental result that you wish to have. And the reason why the nuclear energy program was successful in the 70s was for that reason. Why is recycling, you know, doing so well in the province of Manitoba and so poorly in Ontario? It's for that reason. We have the greatest system in this province, and we're not making the best use of it. What really bothers me about the first part of this presentation was that the research that 350.org bases their campaign on is the same research that all sides of the spectrum around this discussion base their arguments on. That research has been publicly available in the public realm since 2012. So if this is an emergency, why wasn't it discussed during the 2015 federal election campaign? Or 16, or 17, or 18? Why did it take until June of this year for this to become an emergency if, in fact, the data shows it's been an emergency since 2012? We had a municipal election campaign last fall. There was nothing mentioned in December, January, February, March, April, May, June. It's now July. This is now an emergency. What bothers me most about this whole discussion, Mr. Chairman, is the impact it's having on our young people. It's scaring them. It's creating fear where there should be no fear. What there should be is a collective action to do the right thing. To do the right thing locally, as the councillor indicates, which we should be doing. But quite frankly, we've got to think big, and it was really interesting that we saw the Winston Churchill quote. Those who understand Churchill really, really well, and I certainly am a student of the man, will know that he thought big. And if you want to have a tremendous influence on what really needs to be done on the globe to really change where we are today, it's to identify who the major polluters are and what the solutions are. And the fact of the matter is, I've given you three: nuclear energy, carbon capture technology, and recycling. And if we can effectively encourage those emerging geographies to use those technologies, if we can encourage the Government of Canada to work with business and provide a way and a means for the implementation of that technology, that's how you're going to solve the problem. We have to do what we have to do in this country. It's the right thing to do. The progress has been, quite frankly, average. It could be a lot better, and I can tell you, as a member of the business community for 30 years that was involved in leading the charge on recycling in a number of different areas, there's a lot of disappointment today, because the business community is prepared to fund all of what needs to be done in terms of making this a better country from an environmental standpoint. We're being held up by needless regulation and quite frankly, overweening bureaucracy. The solutions are there, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chala. Now, I understand if you're uncomfortable, we could split if it's the mover and the seconder are agreeable. We could have a separate vote on split the motion in two, if that's acceptable to the mover and the seconder. Councillor Best, you have.
Well, if the mover is willing, I'm certainly willing. Councillor Challoner, brought up some excellent points, and if he's more comfortable that way, I would certainly, because I like to see, like the mayor, unanimous support. Because I have a few comments too, Mr. Chairman, when we get around to it.
I don't have a problem splitting it up, as Councillor Challoner has recommended. We could be here all night going back and forth addressing each other's concerns, and I do recognize your concerns, Councillor Challoner, through the chair. But we were going to stick to our knitting. And so I think when we start talking about nuclear energy and large recycling programs and that sort of thing, as important as they are, I'm not sure how much we can do here with respect to that. The point of revising the motion and speaking to people about how we could make it more focused was to make it more focused, to make it more realistic for us as a small step forward into a broader plan.
Councillor Challoner, briefly, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not asking us to consider what I just spoke about in terms of national initiatives with global impact. I'm not asking you to change that. All I'm saying is split the motion. That's a topic for another day, and it may be a topic that I take to the group back here who want to understand it and really make a difference. Glad to have that conversation with them. For the purpose of this discussion, all I'm asking for is to split the motion. I'm not asking you to change your philosophy about what's in it.
Yeah, and I've agreed to that.
Okay. Councillor Best, you have some comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank everyone, and Councillor Tester-Dirksen and everybody involved in the motion. You're not going to please everybody. And this is something, as mentioned on the third page, is for consideration. That's our job as councillors. It's to set priorities and give staff direction. When it comes to budget, we'll make that direction. We have a core services review. That's where we can also address that. In terms of emergency, I can understand the wording concerns, and I respect Councillor Challoner's position. You just only have to look at what Mr. Lambert just said. This is the first year that he, in numerous years, cannot get on the ground. You only have to talk to councillors and mayors around this province to see the concerns. Talk to people from Essex County. All 160 kilometers of their shoreline is now at flood tide. You only have to look at the pictures from Grand Bend and Wasaga Beach, where their beaches are now underwater. Go to Kawartha Lakes and Bracebridge, where their water levels this spring were 20 feet above the top of the bank. That's the height of this room. So imagine if the height of this room happened to our downtown. We wouldn't have one left. And it's the Ottawa Valley. They've had 2 100-year storm levels in the last 5 years. They're basically underwater. That's just only one aspect. And one point that people aren't mentioning is how windy it's getting in this area. I don't have any studies on it, no experts, but you know, the winds have certainly changed. They certainly increased in the intensity. And that's what we saw in Burlington in 2014. It may not have been declared emergency, but when you have 200 millimeters of rain fall in 2 to 3 hours, which is more than most communities get in a month, you know you've got an issue. And that's not happened just once, that's happened 5 times. When you have to rescue people from a GO train with a dinghy, you know you've got problems. When railways built 100 years ago thought they had the height levels. The 100-year storm level is maybe, you know, I'm glad to see the conservation of Halton here. Those flood level lines may have to be changed, not upward, but basically outward as well. Looking at the whole aspect that, you know, we mentioned about the FCM and the Green Municipal Fund, yet there is funding available, but a lot of it the town's already done. Our engineers have put in a plan for LED lighting, which is going to significantly reduce our lighting costs, as well as we have 4 buildings in town with solar panels on top, which is making the town money. So we can self-finance a lot of this stuff, and that's where it's, you know, consideration, you know, for our budget. Where do we go in terms of staffing? That's something that we could also look at. What are our priorities? Well, August 26th, we have to start making decisions. Where do we put our priorities? What do we tell staff? This is where our priority is, because it is a concern not only locally, nationally, but internationally. Where are we going as a people on this planet? And by the way, we're not a small dot anymore. According to the 2016 census, Milton's the 46th largest municipality in Canada out of nearly 2,000. We're going to be in the top 40 in a few years. We're going to be the largest municipality in this region in 15 years. So we have to start thinking, you know, a larger scale, and then we do have an effect because the other 3 municipalities locally have already done this. I'm now on a regional committee that is looking at a regional resolution to this. And I understand there's concerns about the political spectrum, but just remember back in the 1980s, I know it's, you know, a far distance for some people, but we had the concern in Ontario and northeastern United States of acid rain. People from across the political spectrum got together and said, yes, this is a problem. They worked on it and they solved it. We can do the same, just like as Councillor Chalmers mentioned about recycling. You know, worldwide, we've done this a number of times, and you know, I'm not going to go into all the history, but when people are resolved to do something, it can be done.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a point with regards to the concerns with the word emergency. And I agree with Councillor Tester-Dirksen when she mentions that we should look at it in a broader spectrum. This is something that we cannot just say, okay, where is the emergency? Show it to me, and then I'll accept it. What we do here in South affects the north of Canada. It's not something I made up. It's not conjecture. It is facts and figures. You can see the flooding that's happening there. We were in FCM just weeks ago, and we were talking to our colleagues up in the north of Canada who were telling us that they just came back after putting those sandbags to stop flooding up there. Yellowknife, you name it. So what we do here collectively as a whole will solve and provide solutions to the emergency up there. So the emergency is there. The fact that we can't see it right in front of us, that's something that we have to overlook and look up north what's happening in our country. So, and you know what, like Councillor Tester-Dirksen said, we can set a precedent here and be the leaders here who can say, we are agreeing with this, we are supporting this, and
all the other municipalities in the Halton region and the GDA and the south of Ontario, everybody supports it. It gives a strong message to our communities up north, our fellow Canadians, that we care about them and we are taking concrete measures to help them when they are facing those emergencies. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments from members of council? Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, just picking up on, the point that Councillor Best made earlier on there with regards to the the new lighting program that we just got into. Let me maybe go back just a little bit further than that. If anybody thinks that Milton, wasn't on top of this years and years ago, they're mistaking. Take this very building here, and Councillor Best knows exactly where I'm coming from. It's probably 35, 36 years ago when we said, we're going to renovate this building. And guess what we did? We put a 5,000-gallon underground tank here for heating and cooling when people thought we were nuts. Why did we do it? Because of, we recognize the savings. We also recognize the climate was changing. So that's one example. But where I'm really going, Mr. Chairman, on this, and mention was early on one of the presenters there with wind turbines. We spent a few dollars, quite a few dollars. I think Councillor Chandler was on council at that time, and it seems to me it's something like $25,000 or $30,000 on a very, very in-depth wind study to put up turbines. The community went nuts because we were going to be putting up turbines where they should go up, when the study said this is where they should go, this is where they shouldn't go. And what did council do at the time? We asked it, but some of us was on that wavelength at that time. I'm talking 20 years ago. Put them up, capture it. So this isn't new to some of us wanting to get out of that proverbial box and save the climate. So the town of Milton, we've got solar panels all over the place. It isn't new to us. It isn't new to us. We're trying to, and have been trying to save the climate of the town of Milton, the Rees of Halton for years now. So I just want to make that point. It isn't anything new to us. Not to me, anyway. Thank you.
Councillor Di Lorenzo?
Just a few comments. I guess some people are upset about the word emergency and figures it's alarmist and I mean, and what can we do as a municipality, or what can we do as Canada, and what's the cost going to be to us? I mean, over 50 years ago, we landed on the moon. That was called the moonshot, and a huge percentage of our economy and our taxes, Canada, not just the United States. I know the United States, the Apollo program, but Canada was involved with Canadarm and other parts of that as well. Instead of planting a flag, why not save the planet? I think we need a moonshot. I don't consider emergency as alarmist. I think that the after effects of landing on the moon changed the world, changed technology, changed everything from frying pans to what have you. I think the same thing can happen if we get serious about the climate change and we devote serious percentage of our economy to address that. I think the ramifications is going to be we save our planet and we have new technologies that change the way we live in the future. So I am in wholeheartedly support of this motion. If we divide it into two, I'm still going to support both portions, and I want to thank Councillor Tessler-Dirksen and Councillor Best for bringing this forward, and I want to thank my other councillor members who I know multiple ones at this council chambers behind the scenes gave input, gave comments on how to make this motion better.
No other comments from council before I say a few words? Oh, Councillor Dirksen.
Yeah, I just have one more quick, because it seems like we're caught up in this emergency terminology. I mentioned that declaring an emergency sends a message. Not declaring an emergency also sends a message. And if we want to get really focused on the local, if you were a green business looking to open up in Halton, would you pick them one municipality that did not declare a climate emergency? We also have an aggregate company that wants to excavate our natural landscape in Campbellville. What message are we sending to them by not declaring this climate emergency? So this is something else to think about. Don't just think about the ramifications that come from declaring the emergency, but what does the silence tell people as well? And you mentioned the moon landing. Thanks. You know, a real quick story. I was listening, I'm a bit of a space nut. I was listening to an interview with a space historian. The space historian was talking about how in 1959, President Kennedy decided he wanted to send people to the moon. And at that time, it was literally impossible to do so. The technology did not exist, yet 10 years later, people watched human beings bouncing around on the lunar surface. And the interviewer said, well, that's an insurmountable challenge that we addressed. What's a challenge we've got now like that? And of course, the historian said, well, you know, climate change. But in many ways, it's an easier problem to address because we have the plan. We know what we have to do. What we need is action, we need dedication, we need commitment. And that's what I'm asking my colleagues for tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Chaloner.
You might want to vote on the motions first, like decide which one you're going to go with first and second.
Yeah, I just have a couple comments and then I'll deal with the motion and see where you want to go with it. Okay, but if there's no other members of council want to speak, I'll just say a few words. Okay, so, concerning the motion, I have some of the same reservations that were brought up by Councillor Chaloner about what is being proposed here as well. But I also have concerns about what the financial implications will be. There's no mention in the motion what impact implementing these recommendations would have on the taxpayers. But again, that'll be a debate for another day. I believe the true test of this motion will be when the recommendations included here come before council during the budget process, which we know will be a very difficult budget to deal with. So again, we're not committing to anything here tonight, but it will, the rubber will hit the road when this comes before the budget process. So, and just ironically, that budget process will occur after the next federal election, where we just might see a change in government and direction on how we deal with climate change as a nation. So let's see what happens. But then now dealing with the motion, we're going to split it. Okay, now just so we're sure where you want to go with this, I believe it's on your council package, page 3 of 3 or page 91. It will be split to where, and be it further resolved that council direct this resolution to staff in order to undertake the following actions. That is separate from the rest. Everything above that is one motion, and everything following that will be the second vote. Everybody understand? All right. Okay, so I'll call the vote on the first.
Mr. Chair, may I ask for a recorded vote, please?
Recorded vote, yes. Okay, recorded vote has been called. So, all those in favor of the first portion of the motion, please rise.
Councillor Cluett, Councillor Ali, Councillor Best, Councillor DiLorenzo, Mayor Krantz, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, Councillor Hamid, and Councillor Malbuff.
Okay, so that portion passes. Now, for the second portion. All opposed, sorry. All opposed, please rise.
Councillor Chaloner.
For the second portion of the resolution, again, a recorded vote has been called. All those in favor, please rise.
Councillor Cluett, Councillor Ali, Councillor Best, Councillor Chaloner, Councillor DiLorenzo, Mayor Krantz, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, Councillor Hamid, Councillor Malbuff.
That portion of the motion passes unanimously. Okay. So that deals with that portion of the meeting. So okay, we'll give it a couple of minutes as people clear, and we'll take a break for a 2-minute break. Okay, we're getting ready to commence the meeting. Councillor Dirksen. Moving along to items for consideration. Dealing with report number CORS 041-2019. Moved by Councillor Best, seconded by Councillor Cluett. Be it resolved that the town of Milton not proceed with the introduction of a municipal accommodation tax at this time. And that a copy of this report be circulated to the Milton Chamber of Commerce, Halton Region, the Hamilton Halton Brant Regional Tourism Association, as well as the hotels located within the town of Milton. Councillor Best.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank staff for the research on this report, the information they've gleaned as well. I requested this during the last budget. This is one of the items that the province has allowed us to look at is, is a concept of user pay. And we have tourism coming to town. They should pay for the promotion of the town. But I can see that we've had a number of comments here, and I'd ask staff to keep an eye on this issue, that we are having some proposals for more hotels, and I'm not even going to talk about a certain short-term rental company that we've had some issues with, but that could be another area that we could look at. It is, something that, municipalities are gradually catching up with some of the changes and innovations in the hotel business. So let's keep an eye on this, but agree with the staff recommendation.
Any other comments? Councillor Challoner.
Very quickly, I agree with where staff are coming from here. I can tell you that the business community that comes into any municipality and sees this kind of tax will find a way not to come back to that community in the future at some point, unless they absolutely have to. And I think that, we need to be looking at Airbnb and other things as well in terms of regulation. I understand, the concern that hotels have. I understand the concern that municipalities have as well. But I think that we need to help the hotel industry, not hurt it. And this kind of tax hurts hotels, it hurts communities. It's an easy tax grab. It provides very little benefit at the end of the day. And I've certainly spent a lot of time in municipalities where I've had to pay this, and I don't see the benefit.
Okay, I see no other members of council wishing to speak, so I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, next, road safety campaign. Moved by Councillor Ali, seconded by Councillor Best. Be it resolved, whereas speeding on local side streets continues to be a growing problem in Milton, and whereas traffic calming measures on local streets are subject to warrants and timelines, and whereas proactive measures need to be taken by the community to address this issue. Therefore, be it resolved that the town of Milton launch a slow down lawn sign campaign for residents, and that this campaign run for 2 months, and that the signs be only allowed on private property and are subject to the town's sign and road fouling bylaws, and that signs placed in contravention of the town's road fouling bylaw be enforced on a proactive basis, and that residents be given a copy of the rules pertaining to sign placement with every sign, and that the cost of this campaign be funded through the existing traffic safety budget, and that staff be directed to include a service level increase in the 2020 budget in the amount of $2,500 for this initiative for council's consideration. That's the motion before you, members of council. Anybody wish to comment?
Thank you, Chair. It's a pretty simple motion, explains itself well. Speeding continues to be a huge problem in our community, especially in the local side streets. We all keep getting those emails and those calls. One of the reasons the signs are effective for this is because neighbors are very reluctant to talk to their neighbors and go up to them and say, hey, I know it's you who's speeding down every day at school hours, which we know is the fact that it's our neighbors who are speeding on the local streets. So this is another way of communication that they can use, put it on their lawn sign where it's permitted in accordance with the bylaws of our town, only for 2 months. And during those times, our kids can play safely on the streets. It's summer, we encourage them to be active on the streets, so this is another way we can help them be active. And after 2 months, they have to take it off, and it helps everybody, and it makes the job easier for neighbors to talk to, especially because we're a very fast-growing community. A lot of us are very, very new here and don't know the neighbors even. So they're very shy to go up and speak. So the sign will help in that regard as well. So I would request my colleagues to support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Best, is the seconder.
Yeah, similar I agree with Councillor Lee's frustrations. On Friday night, I was speaking to some police officers, and they're equally frustrated. And I'd ask that staff and the mayor, when they're doing delegations at the AMO conferences, speak to provincial ministers, because the penalties aren't high enough. You could stop at any street corner, and and I understand some people, don't obey this. There are some people that don't obey stop signs or traffic lights. You only have to look at the Twitter feed from the Halton Regional Police, Milton and Halton Hills office. They just caught somebody with 3 kids in the back doing 117 in a 60 zone. And that's a local street. I've just had some recent ones actually of one house on a certain small street, all 7 cars speed up and down the street. It's only 200 meters long. And it's just driving the neighbors nuts. They've called the police numerous times. The police have said, unless we're there and catch them in the act, good luck. The street's 200 meters. Good luck trying to catch them in time. But they just come roaring out of there. And it's a similar way you see in Oakville with the municipal bylaw against motorcycles. Good luck trying to have the staff time to enforce that in this time. There's another consideration for next year, but it's one of those things we have, no matter how many signs, and I agree this is a temporary measure, we have to get the enforcement and also the penalties. And as one person said, why don't we have like airline pilots have? They have to renew their license every few years. Drivers should do the same, because that lineup you see at the licensing office should also be a driver's test for some people that can't even park in front of it.
Thank you. Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I won't be supporting the motion, and the reason why is that we have a process today that does work with respect to this particular issue. I'm supportive of the idea of communications that Councillor Ali is outlining, and I think more needs to be done in that regard, but I know that this will not work. I've had a couple occasions already where people in fact have had lawn signs. It hasn't worked for them. They ended up calling me to deal with the issue, and we put in place the process that we currently have with a speed study, enforcement requests of Halton Regional Police, and over time, more than a couple months, it works, but you've got to return to it. And quite frankly, the bigger solution, I think, really is constant communication around this issue and other issues that we have. And it is a serious issue. I had put together a proposal last fall during the election campaign with respect to a permanent education program that wouldn't cost an awful lot of money. Quite frankly, I hadn't envisaged that it would cost even $2,500. It's using existing town property, advertising properties, the website, etc., to create communication that changes people's attitudes about speeding. And speeding's not the only traffic issue that we face. I also have an issue about, 2 things. One is our financial position. And that's why I was concerned about the last motion, although I think that I understand that it's a consideration in 2020. I would have rather have seen, quite frankly, a larger program proposed in the 2020 budget that deals with this issue and other issues we're having, quite frankly, in the community around bylaw enforcement issues and permanent education. I've on a first-hand basis seen that this will not work. I've had to deal with it, and you know, I appreciate the effort, but we need an awful lot more than this. And I also would suggest that, you know, I have to believe at some point staff had the conversation with Councillor Ali that they've had with me and with others about here's what we can do. And I think that what we are doing today from a micro level is adequate. From a macro level, we need permanent education. And that's a discussion with communications, and it's a longer term discussion. I'll say one more thing on this, Mr. Chairman, and that is, you know, we're running a railroad here, and we want to try to avoid playing with the trains as much as possible. And we're almost playing with the trains with this motion, as we were almost playing with the trains in the last motion. We have a professional staff. You go to staff with a problem, you might suggest a solution for them to think about, but at the end of the day, we either accept what they come back with or we don't. That's the process. And, you know, I just, at this point, for these reasons, I can't support it. But, you know, would I like to see a fulsome communications program that Councillor Ali has contemplated? Yes, I would.
Thank you. Councillor Di Lorenzo.
So before this council meeting, I did some research. I called some of the councillors. I called one of the councillors in Oakville because they implemented this some time ago to ask how it was going, part of the outreach program. The councillor said it was very successful. He felt that it had an impact on residents, on education, on driving. And then I did look for as much as I can, if I could find a study to see if there was any pre or post studies of people speeding. And I found one study in Oceanside, California. There are signs saying slow down, keep kids safe, slow down kids at play. There are signs like this in other municipalities in Canada and across the United States. And there was a study done in California showing that they spent the money to do traffic studies of how fast motorists are going before the signs were implemented and after the signs implemented. And it showed a 16% reduction, about 1 or 2 kilometers an hour. And you say 1 or 2 kilometers, that's nothing, but again, there are studies showing even a small reduction in speed on residential streets, on streets where it's like 50 kilometers an hour, has a significant difference in fatalities and serious injuries. Going 55 to 50 or 45 to 40 on these residential streets where pedestrians are involved, it does have an impact on fatalities. Now, the study was done in a short term, so it was done before and a few months after. There wasn't a study a year or 2 years later to see if it was sustained, but then there were other peer reviews by other traffic engineers, not the same as a scientific study, I understand, but all of the research I've done shown that there was a pre and there was a post effect on motorists. And and when motorists were surveyed why they slowed down, they said they saw the sign. And some of them are also going by, there's peer influence. If you see your neighbors and see the street you're driving on are asking you to slow down, it does influence your behavior. So I don't feel this is a feel-good, motion. I feel it does have an effect, and I feel it will improve safety. Milton is one of the last municipalities to pass this. I believe Halton Hills just passed it this year, and Oakville and Burlington have already done so. Toronto, Mississauga has as well. So we're late to the game, but you can do some research again on other municipalities, and other municipalities have spent money doing studies, and it's shown that it did have an effect. So I thank Councillor Ali and Councillor Cluett for bringing this forward, and I wholeheartedly support it.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question and I guess a comment. at least in my opinion, it's a feel-good resolution. I don't mind feeling good, so I can support it. Okay, so I really want to feel really good, but is it going to change speeding? I hear the statistics. It might change a little bit, but I'm here to tell you, speeding's here to stay. It's here to stay. And if we're talking about just a revenue producer, well, let's raise the fines and raise a bit more money so some of us politicians can spend it in some other ways, okay? And I'm one of those politicians as well, so I want to make that very clear as well. Now, I talked about this earlier on where we're giving direction to staff, and I understand the 2020 budget is for council's consideration. I think I made my point earlier on, but I'm going to make it again. Be careful what we're starting to do. And I think, Mr. Chairman, you got the point. I think because you touched on it as well. And that the cost of this campaign be funded through the existing traffic safety budget. I don't have a big problem with that, but I have no idea whether we're talking $5, $500, $5,000. Do we have the money already in that traffic safety budget? I have no idea. So I'd like to really know.
Would any member of staff want to respond? Commissioner Cripps?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, we have capacity in the 2019 budget to handle about $2,000 for this program this year, so we've got the cost covered.
Well, that, Mr. Chairman, that's certainly helpful to know. I see already there are some of these signs, I think, out on private property, out on boulevards now where I see them, you know, and I drive around the town. I do know what's out there when it comes to signs. We've been criticized for sign pollution in the past, too. So is this what this is going to be if it's not going to have any effect? But I'm willing to feel good if there's an appreciable impact that it'll have. And we could soon find that out. But I'm also thinking, and this includes me as well, if we're really serious about it, I have no idea how much each one of these signs cost, but let's just say it costs $10. Am I prepared to pay $10 to put it up on my sign if I'm really concerned about it? And I'd find out very quickly how many of our residents are really concerned if they're ready to pay $10 and put it up in their lawn for, you know, a month or 2 or 3. So something to think about as well. Because I know, Mr. Chairman, I've been around this for a while. We'll pay attention to a half a dozen people, but what about the other 1,000 people out there that's not a concern of them whatsoever, including speeding?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First time speaker, Councillor Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My initial concern when I read this was just what the mayor mentioned with pollution, just overwhelming the public with signage. There was an episode of The Simpsons years ago where the townspeople, The Simpsons has predicted everything in politics. There was an episode where the townspeople got really paranoid about road safety, and then the signs were everywhere to the point there's a rock on the sidewalk, there's a sign that said caution rock, you know, so I think signage can lose its effect if there's too much of it. That being said, I thought about this when we place police officers in areas where we see excessive speeding. There is a change in driver behavior for a little while, and then it goes back. So I feel like this would have the same effect at a much lower cost. I know from personal experience when I'm driving, I might just be coasting along, but when I see one of those signs or one of those little yellow people with the hat and the flag, I remember myself. I recall, I check my speed. I'm like, yeah, I gotta remember that, because sometimes people's minds just get away on them when they're driving. So I'll support the motion. I actually think it's a well-priced initiative that will feel good and will maybe reduce some speeding issues at a cost much cheaper than having police officers out there.
Councillor Cluett, first time speaker.
Thank you very much. I won't belabor the point. I'll be supporting this. This is a form of communication to our residents, and we do get, on a number of occasions, requests from residents to have signs up on the sign poles. We had a couple that were installed with autistic child. We have, please be careful in my neighborhood, children at play. There are signs all over the place, but those are up on the not the flag poles, but the light posts. These are signs that are going to be on personal individual lawns. And going back a number of years, we were involved, I was involved in a similar campaign to the Friends of Milton Hospital. It was a Grow Milton Hospital campaign. And we put signs on people's lawns that said Grow Milton Hospital. It wasn't there to do anything, but it was there, and we raised awareness. And as Councillor Tesser-Dirksen mentioned, if you're driving along the street and you see one of these the little turtles with the flags, or you see a sign, you might drop your eyes to your speedometer to make sure that you're driving the speed. And that's all that we're asking people to do. And hopefully, if it makes an impact, it makes an impact. If it, you're never going to control speeding. You can't have police officers at every corner. You can only hope and you can only ask people to drive the speed limit. And for those who are still watching online or those in our media, please drive safely and follow the speed limits. Until then, until everybody's compliant, then we're going to have to look at different tools. This is just one of the tools that we can have in our toolbox. Thanks very much.
Councillor Lee.
Signs work. You know why? Look at all of us. We're sitting here because of signs. Lawn signs for elections. So having said that, that was just a joke. But having said that, I used to live in Mississauga before I moved to Milton, and speeding was a huge issue in the community I was living in. And at that time, the lawn sign campaign was introduced in Mississauga, and it had a huge impact in my neighborhood. And this is where this is coming from. I actually went to Mississauga, got 3 lawn signs, and I placed them on my street, which is Bison Circle. You can go drive there right now. You will see three of them on the curve where there's huge speeding issue. I am not lying when I tell you there has been a huge impact because of those signs. The speeding has stopped. The neighbor who was doing it got the clear message and has stopped speeding around that bend where the kids play and have basketball tournaments. So I think this is a great tool that will help mitigate the speeding issues. It is cost effective. It is certainly cheaper, like Councillor Tesser just pointed out, cheaper than putting a police officer there. And it's just for 2 months. And after that, people are supposed to take them off. And in those 2 months, I am sure that we will see a positive difference. So I will appreciate any support on this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Challoner?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. It's not cheaper than a police officer. We're already paying for the police officer. This is an additional cost. And I go back to, we really need to be careful about, again, are we running the railway or are we playing with the trains? And, if we want an effective communications campaign, then we need to have a conversation with the CAO, and he needs to have a conversation with Jody, and we need to build something that is effective. Because, Councillor DiLorenzo, I respect, the information you provided, but there's no context for it. And context is everything. And I can tell you the context I've had happened in this municipality in the last 6 months, okay? And I can tell you what works and what's not working from my perspective, having dealt with people who had signs and were having speeding issues, and what did work. But the reality is, the only thing that really works is constant public education. And, I hope that the CAO is listening, and I hope that Jody gets wind of the conversation and looks into it, because quite frankly, that is the answer. It's not only the answer for speeding. There's a whole list of things that need to be dealt with in this municipality to make people's quality of life better. And we really need to, I think a lot more strategically and limit, the pressure to pander. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Chairman, I'm only going to assume that this motion is going to pass. I guess the ordering of the signs, how long would they go up? And I'm just thinking, school starts in another, 6 weeks, whatever it is, would they be up just about that time? And I know we're talking about a 2-month trial period, but 2 months goes by fairly quick. And we're also talking about consideration. I'm working on an assumption now for the 2020 budget that this would be turned down. But then we'll have $2,000 worth of signs out there someplace. But could we reuse them? Do we take them back? Are we going to store them here? Is people going to come pick them up? Or are we going to have crews go around, place them on lawns and all those nice things? Something I'd really be interested in, because I'm supportive of what the intent is. It's most honorable, for sure. So, but some of those little details, and I don't want to get right down into the details, but something that's really interesting, 2 months, there's $2,000 worth of signs. Are we going to throw them away? I don't know. But through you, Mr. Chairman, to staff or the mover and seconder of the motion, is there any thought of that?
Any member of staff want to deal with it, or the mover?
So what is being proposed is that a small number of signs will be printed out, and if there is more required, then more will be printed out, and they will be used by people, and when the time period is over, they're required to take it out and put it back. They can save it for using it next year.
Okay.
Any other speakers before I make my comments? Okay. I agree with the intent of the motion, but I can't support it for a number of reasons. First of all, staff, as well as the previous council and this council, spent a lot of time developing a sign bylaw to deal with the problem we were having concerning sign pollution in our community. And here we have a recommendation that goes contrary to that bylaw we passed. We are telling our businesses they can't put signs out promoting their businesses. We have put in restrictions on charities and nonprofit organizations from placing signs promoting their events. But when it comes to promoting one of our own pet projects, those rules and regulations do not apply. It seems it's do as we say, not as we do, and that I have a problem with. My other reason for not supporting this is that I do not believe it will do anything to reduce speeding that we are seeing on our streets. We will be wasting staff time and taxpayer dollars on a program that will have virtually no impact. And I'm not the only one who has that opinion. I spoke to the chief of the Halton Regional Police about this, and he agrees with me. He does not believe that a slowed down sign project actually has an impact. Because once a motorist has driven past that sign 2 or 3 times, it becomes invisible and loses its effectiveness. But what he did suggest was for Milton to consider implementing a photo radar program. As we know, the province has passed legislation that allows municipalities to implement such a program. These cameras could be set up in school zones, main boulevards, on our side streets where there seems to be a speeding problem. The knowledge that these cameras are out there will make drivers think twice about speeding, since they will not know where those cameras are situated at any time. Start hitting speeders where it hurts in the pocketbook, and that will change their driving habits. Invisible signs won't. If we are serious about reducing the speeding and aggressive driving on our streets, then let's implement a plan that will do that, rather than a feel-good plan. So I would ask Council to vote against this recommendation, and then I would ask staff to contact the Halton Regional Police about how we go about implementing photo radar in Milton, and then have staff come back to Council with a report. If there's no other comments, then I'm
just going to make one quick comment about the cameras, which I think sound like a good idea, but when we tell residents that we have cameras hidden throughout town, I know we're going to get emails from people concerned about their privacy, because I'm already getting them for private citizens concerned about their neighbors installing security cameras, and I just want to mention that now. And also, I wouldn't call public safety a pet project. And speaking to the police, saying that after the first 1, 2, or 3 times that the driver sees the sign, they ignore it. Well, then there was an impact the first, second, and third time they saw the sign. That's just my comment.
Again, photo radar is not a security camera. It takes a picture of the car. That's speeding. There's no further comments. Do I have to read the motion, or everybody? No. Okay, fine. So all those in favor of the motion, raise your hands. 2, 3. That's 6. Motion passes. Okay, we do have an in-camera session. Does anybody wish to go in camera? No, hold on there, let's see where we are here.
Mr. Chairman, I would just move the recommendation.
Aye. Recommendation moved by Councillor Best, seconded by Councillor Hamid. All those in favor? Okay, that takes care of that. And now we'll go to, okay. All right, so I'll read the resolution. That the recommendation contained in staff report PD 035-19 be approved. All those in favor? Okay. Now, regional council update. Anybody? Councillor Best?
Yeah, I've already put in two of my items. Just for those councillors and mayor going to the AMO conference, we're just having our update this week, and we promise very interesting sessions and also maybe some announcements coming from ministers. So for those first-time councillors, I certainly welcome you to the Bear Pit session on Tuesday afternoon, which promises to be very interesting.
Any other regional council? Being none? Okay, so moved by Councillor Best, seconded by Councillor Cluett. Be it resolved that bylaw numbers 071-2019, 072-2019, and 073-2019 be read, passed, and numbered, and that the mayor and the town clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaws, seal them with the seal of the corporation that may be engrossed in the bylaw book. All those in favor? Having that, the meeting is now adjourned.